morning, everyone. Hello, my name is Philip Choi, and I am the Executive Director here at Safety Driven Trucking Safety Council of BC. And I would like to welcome you to our 5th annual speaker series and our very first online event. Safety Driven, the Trucking Safety Council of BC, is an industry-led organization, and we are dedicated to improving occupational health and safety in trucking and related industries, such as transportation, supply chain logistics, and waste management. Our main goal is to improve safety operations and to reduce injury and fatality rates. We also have a key focus on expanding our outreach and engagement with all aspects of industry. One of the ways we look to do this is through events like our speaker series, which is intended to bring you and industry valuable, relevant, and timely information and tools that you can put into practice. At Safety Driven, we are proud of being approachable and of our ability to make safety accessible. We strive to do this by offering a wide range of programs, services, and tools that are tailored to the needs of industry. Some of our key programs and services include a team of occupational health and safety professionals who will work with you every step of the way to help build and refine your safety programs. We also have a truckload of resources that you can download for free at our website at safetydriven.ca on a variety of topics for managers, supervisors, safety reps, workers, drivers, and owner-operators. We also have safety training and courses available both in class and online. As a certifying partner for WorkSafe BC's Certificate of Recognition program, we also offer CORE for trucking and related industries. All right, let's get into the reason why we're all here. I am pleased to introduce our returning Speaker Series Master of Ceremonies, Jag Dat. Jag is the Editor-in-Chief of Desi Trucking Magazine, Rack and Opinion, and the South Asian Fleet and Owner Magazine. He is also the Senior Vice President and Partner at JGK Media. Jag has had a lifelong passion for trucks and the automotive world. He attended UBC and the University of Oregon, obtaining a Bachelor of Arts and Bachelor of Education, as well as a Master of Education in Educational Leadership and Curriculum Design. He now combines his passion and education to inform and entertain others in our industry. Thank you for being with us here today, Jag.
Well, Philip, first of all, thank you so much for, again, inviting me to this event. Safety Driven has always put on a spectacular series of events, and this is just one of the highlights of what they do. As you may know, as Philip has already mentioned, this is not my first gig as an MC. I've been very blessed and very fortunate to be able to MC some big corporate events in Toronto, in Vancouver, and also in California as well. One of the biggest highlights that we had was at the APNA Truck Show that takes place in Vancouver, British Columbia here. And at that time, I was emceeing a VIP dinner gala night in which we raised over $100,000 for the BC Children's Wish Foundation. So I am very fortunate to be a part of this event, and the speaker series has always been amazing. Speaking of speaker series, last year we were in Prince George, central British Columbia. It's a beautiful, beautiful town, and it was great to be able to go there, interact with this tight-knit community. And it was the day was full of information, it was full of fun, and of course, we got to meet a lot of new people, which we hope to continue to do in the future as well. Let's talk about what we're going to be doing. So it's always an honor for me to be a part and host the Safety Driven Speaker Series, and it's a privilege to be able to interact with all our attendees and our delegates. And this year, for the very first time, we're doing this virtually, which means online. And we do appreciate that all of you are able to get things set up. And this is the 5th year for the speaker series. So it's been doing very well, and Safety Driven hopes to continue this thing in the near future as well. Throughout this entire day, I will be with you. I'll help you guide through the processes. I'll make sure that you get here and learn about some increasingly important topics that take place. And today we're going to be talking about managing multi-generational change in the workforce and how that connects to the transportation industry. So that's going to be our focus today. We have, for the next 3 hours together, we're going to hear from 3 of Canada's best speakers. And these guys, well, these people are fantastic at what they do. First up, we're going to hear from Mike Harnett, who is the president of Solaris Fatigue Management. Her presentation called Eyes Wide Shut, not the movie. If you've seen it, you know the movie's fantastic as well. Her presentation, Eyes Wide Shut, We Don't Have a Fatigue Problem, will address fatigue. And get this, it's related to over 850 car accidents or vehicle accidents in British Columbia alone. So that's a pretty staggering number, and we're going to hear from her on how to address this thing. After that, we're going to hear from Norm Ralph, who is the president of Apex Abilities. He's going to be walking us and talking us through the aging workplace. And did you know that the trucking workforce is now aging at a higher rate than any other industry in Canada? It's pretty important that we address this right away. So Norm is going to tell us all about that. And our keynote address today is going to be delivered by David Coletto, who is a CEO and founding partner of Abacus Data. In his discussion of work leadership in the millennial age, David will share some interesting information on what generational change means in the industry. Trust me, you don't want to miss that one, especially considering how important it is. We'll also be taking 2 health breaks, and these are going to be led by Tracy Steen from Move Daily Fitness. She's going to show us some great short workouts that you can have not only in your office, but if you're on the road and you're in a driver's seat, how to take that time and stay healthy as well. And most important, what event is ever possible without prizes? So we're going to have lots of prizes throughout the entire event. You need to be here for some of them, and some of them you've already been automatically registered for. So that means we're going to have a great day as well. We know that any event is not possible at all without sponsors. And this year, we'd like to thank the following sponsors for their prizes and also for their efforts as well. Safety Vantage, the first one. Solaris Fatigue Management, thank you. Move Daily, Tracy Steen Fitness, and JGK Media Inc. Today, our sponsors have generally provided some great prizes, which we'll be giving away throughout the entire event. And once again, for some of them, you have to be here. Some of them, you'll get an email as well. All right. For a virtual event, we need to get social, right? Everybody does this thing. I know that when you're out getting a cup of coffee, or maybe you're at a store that's just opening up, like Nordstrom Rack that opened up in Langley, people are standing there taking selfies. So what we'd like for you to do is include us in your experiences. So share your stuff. You'll see hashtags on the screen right now as well. There's hashtags SD Speaker Series 2020 and hashtag Safety Driven SS 2020. You're going to find these hashtags throughout the entire event at the bottom of the screen, so you don't need to write them down. So what I'd like for you to do is tag us on social media. Now, to make sure you're interacting, I know that you're sitting there. Some of you may be enjoying a cup of coffee, or maybe you're still having breakfast, or maybe you're all suited up like I tried to. So what we'd like to do first is take a quick poll. So if you look on your screen, you'll notice that you have a poll. And poll number 1 says, where do you get your safety industry news from? Social media, a subscribed newsletter, Google search, or something else. So if you can just click on those things, click one where you get your information from, and we'll start tabulating the results. And why we're doing this thing is so that we get information, or Safety Driven gets information on how to provide better and more relevant information to you, the user, of course. So we're going to wait for some of you to see what our poll 1 results are like. All right, so 78% of you get information from subscribed newsletter. That's great. That's very good information. And then we've got Google searches and other, which of course is up to you. And of course, social media is also good. So thank you very much for being a part of our first poll. We're going to be doing a few of these as well. All right, so to get into this entire event, the virtual event, you're going to be hearing from one of our first speakers today. And today, I'd like to introduce you to Mike Harnett. And yes, Mike is the president of Solaris Fatigue Management. It's a consulting firm that specializes in optimizing worker health, safety, and performance. Mike is an award-winning speaker and is regarded as an expert on the science of fatigue and its impact on performance. She has been a consultant on various governmental agencies, including the Canadian Standards Association. And this is the one I love the most. She's also been a consultant with NASA. So Cape Canaveral, the Kennedy Space Center, she's there. And so for her, it is rocket science, and we appreciate her being here. Mike is currently guiding various regulatory, labor, and safety associations in developing fatigue risk management plans. So it's very important. She also provides private industry experience, including trucking and mining. And that's where pleasure to have her here. So let's listen as she leads us through a session focusing on fatigue fighting strategies that can be used at the organizational level at your company. Now, just a couple of reminders. Feel free to put in any questions that you have in the Q&A section, and we'll spend 10 minutes after the presentation with Mike to answer your questions. Remember, use the Q&A section for the questions and not the chat feature. Sometimes it can get a little confusing, and that's okay. So now, great time to put some sharing to the test as well for you. So keep your mouses on the Q&A section and do that. So what I'd like to do, I'd like to welcome Mike to our Speaker Series 2020.
Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon to our Eastern friends that have joined us today. I named this session Eyes Wide Shut simply because so many companies in the transportation sector fall under hours of service regulations, and a lot of them are actually treating that as their fatigue management plan. And I'm here to tell you that that's not a fatigue management plan. And there's, while the hours of service regulations have come in with good intentions, they're a little bit lacking in terms of being up to date with current fatigue science, and they certainly don't account for time of day factors. So it also doesn't do anything to prevent somebody from showing up tired at your workplace. Who hasn't had a crying child that woke them up in the middle of the night and disturbed their sleep? So we cannot rely on hours of service regulations to be our program. We need to do a little bit more than that. So I'm going to jump in and talk a little bit about fatigue management, but I want to start off with talking about how much sleep we actually need. And this is very important for all adults, and it doesn't matter what age you are, we do have a minimum requirement. And that requirement is somewhere between 7 to 9 hours of sleep every 24 hours. What that means is all adults require at least 7 hours of sleep to fully repair the brain and the body from the day's activities. Okay, every 24 hours. Now I'm saying every 24 hours because we have a lot of situations where someone could work and maybe drive for up to 13 hours, maybe be awake even for 14 hours while they're on duty, and then off, but then they'll come right back to work. So that would be only 22 hours before they're now returning to work. So they're not actually getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep within that 24-hour period. We are not a 7-day species. We are not a 3-month species. We are not a 3-day species. We are a 24-hour species. And that means regardless of what schedule we work, we have to stay in sync with our planet of 24 hours. And that means we require every day that minimum 7 to 9 hours. Now, as we get older, and when I say older, we're probably talking around the 60 plus age range, that ratio drops 7 to 8 hours. And the reason that we don't need 9 hours is more to the effect that we're not as active as we are when we're younger. But we all still need that same minimum amount of 7 consecutive hours, okay, one block of sleep. Now, the problem that we have with that, of course, is that we have professional drivers who are operating on erratic schedules or who are trying to sleep during daytime hours. So now we're impacting both quantity and quality of sleep. And we know that people on those types of schedules are averaging 2 hours less than people that work the traditional daytime schedules. So what are we doing when we're on these schedules? How are we trying to cope? Well, a lot of people are reaching for things like caffeine. So here's the thing about this. Uh, Caffeine is not going to help you with fatigue. Okay, you cannot Red Bull fatigue away, you cannot Starbucks it away, you cannot Tim Horton it away. All right. When it comes to fatigue, fatigue is based on the principle that we have fatigue related chemicals. We actually have toxic waste that is building up in our brain. That's what fatigue is. It's a biological state. And the only thing that gets that toxic waste out of our brain is sleep. Caffeine will not do that. What caffeine does is it will help you when you're going through a drowsy period. Drowsiness is not the same as fatigue. Drowsiness fluctuates throughout the day. And yes, having a cup of coffee may delay you from feeling the effects of fatigue, but it is not eliminating the fatigue that has built up in your brain. Only sleep will get rid of that. So let's talk about that sleep and why it's so important. So what I'm showing you here is a typical young, healthy adult sleep pattern, and this is based on a person who works during daytime hours and typically sleeps at nighttime. So here's the kind of pattern that we would love to see. And I want to explain what we're looking at here. So across the bottom, you're going to see if we were sleeping for 8 hours, here's the pattern, the general pattern that we try to see. So you're in the awake state when you go to bed and you first put your head on the pillow and you close your eyes. You're going into stage one of light sleep. Stage one and stage two are both considered light sleep period. It's that period where our brain waves slow down. And things like our muscles are told to relax, our kidneys are told to shut down, our stomach lining doesn't have the protective coating anymore because you're not supposed to be eating at night. And it's really preparing you for this transition into unconsciousness. You do a lot of snoring in the late stages. And then after that, you're going to drop down into what we call the deep recuperative state, the quality sleep of delta. So deep, D for delta, D for deep. Okay. So delta waves, they're long, slow brain waves. And during this phase, two critical things are happening. First, it's the only time that the human growth hormone is released in the body. That human growth hormone is responsible for all of the physical repair of the tissues in the body. And that includes your musculoskeletal system, it includes your organs, it includes your skin, your eyes, it includes your immune system. So very important that we get good delta sleep because it helps to prevent things like colds and viruses. And in this age of COVID, that's even more important. So delta sleep is very important because it focuses on the physical repair of our body. But here's what happens when we sleep. As we continue through going in and out of these different stages, we start to shift and we leave a lot of the delta sleep behind and we transition into REM sleep for the last half of our sleep cycle. Now, REM sleep is important because this is the mental and emotional repair state. This is when cognitively we recharge our reaction times, we have our reasoning and our logic, and we're able to assess situational hazards around us. So it's a very critical stage from a cognitive perspective, but it's also very important to replenish our emotional tolerances. We know that people that are tired when there are more road rage incidents, for example. So we have to be really cognizant of the fact that we need to go through a certain amount of sleep, but we also need to get to the different stages of sleep. If we cut our sleep short, we're definitely going to be having some impact on cutting out REM sleep, which is that emotional and cognitive repair state, which is why a lot of professional drivers actually have very high divorce rates simply because they're not very pleasant people to be around because emotionally they're on edge, they're not as easy to communicate with, they're cranky, miserable people sometimes, and it's all because they don't get enough REM sleep. Now, one little thing I want to point out here, this little blip, that's a waking episode. And usually we'll have several little waking episodes throughout the night that we won't even notice. And it's usually when we're just turning over in bed. Now, I mentioned this is a healthy adult sleep pattern for younger adults, for the most part, young to mid adults, but we go through a transition when we get older. So the older adult sleep pattern, what you're going to see here is first off, there's your delta sleep at the bottom. They're not as broad, they're not as long, they don't last as long. We don't get as much delta sleep. We lose about 50% of that delta sleep by the time we reach the age of 60. And then we also have a change in REM sleep. We don't have as many REM episodes as we did when we were younger. But what's worse than all of that is that we have a lot more waking episodes. And not only do we have more waking episodes, but they're longer in nature, which means that when you do wake up, you don't just fall right back asleep. You actually stay awake for longer periods of time. So you may spend 8 hours in bed, but you're only getting 6 hours of sleep. So the older adult is going to have more complications simply because as we get older, we're going to have difficulty with things like we have to get up and pee a lot more when we're older because our bladder doesn't retain as much fluid because we've lost the elasticity in our bladder. It also can't hold as much. So we have a tendency to go to the bathroom more often. We also have more medical conditions that we're dealing with. So we could have aches and pains that are waking us up in the middle of the night, or we're taking medications to help us sleep that are influencing our ability to stay asleep. So there's a lot of things that will affect us as we get older that impact our ability to sleep. But the biggest factor is that as we get older, we start to produce less melatonin. Melatonin is our natural sleep hormone. It's what helps us fall asleep and stay asleep. So it's a very critical component to have in our system. In some countries, in Europe in particular, there are certain industries where they don't let people over the age of 45 actually work night shifts simply because of the effects on their health status. All right, so we got some issues there. Now, why are we worried about tired truck drivers at all? I mean, shouldn't we just rely on the fact that they can tell when they're tired and when they're going to drift off? Well, there's a lot of questions there to be answered, but I want to show you something from a business case perspective, because if I walk into any organization and I say, look, your employees are tired, we need to do something about it. A lot of times management will throw their hands up and say, well, so what if they're tired? We're all tired. I'm tired. The difference being a person sitting in a desk looking at a computer, his level of tiredness is not going to have the same repercussions as somebody operating an 18-wheeler. So it comes down to risk assessment. But I also want to put this into a business case perspective. So this was a study that was done by Virginia Transportation Tech Institute, and a colleague of mine actually led this research. And they were doing driver simulations and looking at the effects of fatigue on how truck drivers operated their vehicles. And what they found is that the more tired they were, the closer they would drive to the vehicle in front of them, especially if it was another truck. And the reason for that was because it meant that they didn't have to be as aware of everything else around them if they just focused on whatever the driver in front of them was doing, which is not good because you're losing situational awareness. But on top of that, you have to realize that when we're driving tired, we have slower reaction times. So when you're driving closer to somebody, that means there's going to be a lot more hard braking episodes. So those hard braking episodes, what does that translate into? Driving up your fuel costs. In fact, in this study, they found that the fuel was being driven up by about 7%. So we know that fuel costs are a primary concern, if not the main concern, in a lot of trucking industries right now. So when I can equate and say, look, your tired truck drivers are costing you money in fuel, now there seems to be a little bit more buy-in. In terms of obstructive sleep apnea, we know that people who are at high risk for obstructive sleep apnea are males, and particularly those over the age of 50. Now, in research conducted, and again, I'm saying truckers here a lot, and that's just to point out that this wasn't open to all commercial drivers. We're not talking taxi drivers and bus drivers. We're talking strictly truck drivers. This particular research, we saw that OSA positive drivers had a 5-fold greater risk of serious preventable crashes if they were not receiving treatment. So we have a lot of people out there who have OSA or obstructive sleep apnea that aren't receiving treatment. And for those who aren't aware of what obstructive sleep apnea is, it's when you stop breathing while you're trying to sleep for at least 10 seconds at a time. So you're starving both your brain and your heart of oxygen. Here's the thing. Why are they not receiving treatment? Well, because first off, 1 in 4 Canadians have obstructive sleep apnea, but 75% of those who have it have not been diagnosed with it yet. In other words, we've got a lot of tired people out there who know they're tired, but have not gone to get checked out. One of the biggest risk factors, of course, associated with this is if you are a very loud snorer or if you gasp in the middle of the night, that is a major risk factor for suggesting you may have obstructive sleep apnea. On top of that, we know that 29%, this is interesting, this is a study that just came out from Finland, 29% of people who were hospitalized for COVID were also suffering from non-severe obstructive sleep apnea. So not even severe cases, but non-severe obstructive sleep apnea. They found this to be one of the primary risk factors for people who had COVID. And of those who did have OSA and COVID, 1/4 of them actually ended up in ICU. So when they looked at all the other factors that were contributing to people getting COVID, this was, I believe, the second highest link that they saw was people who had obstructive sleep apnea were more likely to develop COVID and more serious forms of COVID. So I just want to show you, a lot of times we talk about, truck driving incidents and risks and everything, but nobody's really actually seen it in real life. So this is what I want to show you right now. I want you to pay attention to the fact that oops, let me go back here. I want you to pay attention to the fact that this guy's eyes, look at his eyes now, they're already closing and they're just very long, deep blinks. We call those microsleeps. And a microsleep, as you can see, is drifting across the center line. Thankfully, there's nobody there. A microsleep can last anywhere from 2 seconds to 30 seconds. But during that time, you don't hear anything, you don't see anything, your sensory perceptions are being shut down. And as you'll notice, his eyes are shutting longer and longer and more frequently. And here we go. Okay, so now the change in the road has abruptly woken him. You think he has control of the vehicle, but his cognitive skills aren't there and he can't control it. So again, that question of, well, why don't we just let the guys self-analyze themselves? Well, the truth of the matter is we will always overestimate our level of alertness and underestimate how tired we are. Why? Because fatigue is an impairment. The front part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, shuts down when we're tired. So we cannot judge our own level of impairment. That's why we don't stop the vehicle when we're in that state and just go and have a nap. So we have some organizational challenges. Some of these challenges include things like fatigue being underreported, mostly because employees don't want to tell anybody that they're tired, especially if they're behind the wheel, because they don't want to have any kind of disciplinary action applied to them. So if we have an unjust culture or a blame culture, it's less likely that employees are going to talk about the fact that they're suffering from fatigue or struggling with this on a regular basis. Fatigue is also very hard to detect. I mean, sometimes it's easy when we can see their eyes blinking, but sometimes we don't notice that and they can still have their eyes open, but we're not picking up that they're tired. It's also difficult to measure. It's not like we have a breathalyzer for fatigue. There are other ways that we can measure it, but it can become complex. And fatigue itself and sleep neurobiology is extremely complex. There's nothing simple about fatigue. And again, as I mentioned earlier, there's that badge of honor that a lot of us think that, when people say, hey, how you doing? Oh man, I'm tired. I'm working so hard. Well, there's a big difference between working hard and working smart. So our first poll question, I'm going to shift that over to safety driven for a second to pull up the question. Which of these subjects is specifically addressed in your fit for work plan? I'm assuming you have a fit for work or fit for duty plan, and just check all that apply. And if you don't have a fit for duty plan, that's fine too. And the results. Okay, so 80% say yes, drugs and alcohol is part of their fit for work plan. 30% say fatigue impairment is, 75% say physical health ergonomics is, and mental health 50%. Okay, so it's not surprising to see the drugs and alcohol kind of leading the way, because that was always the initial state for why we even set up a drug and alcohol or a fit for duty plan. So here's what I want you to think about. I'm suggesting that there are 4 fit for duty pillars, one being drugs and alcohol, one being fatigue impairment, one being physical health, and one being mental health. And the reason I say this is that if we expect an employee to be able to perform to the standard that we want them to perform to, then they have to show up in a state that allows them to do that. And drugs and alcohol, absolutely, that can impair their abilities, as can fatigue, but so can physical health and mental health status. And not only can they individually affect performance, but they feed off of each other. So, for example, if you have an individual who has a sore back, he may be taking medication to alleviate that pain. And now you've got a drug and alcohol problem, even though it's a prescribed medication. Or you could have somebody who's going through a divorce and they're struggling with mental health issues and it's affecting their sleep. Or maybe they're taking alcohol to help them get to sleep, and that's affecting the quality of their sleep. So every one of these feeds off of each other. So we can't just expect that if we have a plan to manage one of these, it's going to take care of performance issues out there. It's not. So we need to expand that fit for duty concept and understand that we need to manage all of these and have something in place. And as we get older, there's going to be more reliance on things like physical health and fatigue in particular. So when we talk about fit for duty, there's a lot of emphasis on making sure that the employee shows up fit to do their job. But we also have to look at the other side of the equation, making sure that the work is designed to fit the worker. And what we're talking about here is a human factors process. Is the job designed to accommodate what we know about the human body and the human capabilities that we have? So here we're talking about things like schedule designs and workloads. All right, poll question number 2, if you could bring that up for me, safety driven. Do you have a fatigue management plan that extends beyond prescriptive rules and schedule management? And results are in. 6% say yes, 94% say no. Okay, well, that tells us a lot right there, doesn't it? Okay, let's talk about what exactly we need to start considering here. So, how is fatigue currently being managed? Well, there are typically three approaches. The first approach you're all familiar with, that's the prescriptive approach. Those are your hours of service regulations, and those are the things that you must do or must accommodate for. But again, they're limited and they're not preventing employees from showing up fatigued. We know that. In fact, we know that 31% of truck drivers who suffer a fatality as the truck driver, 31% of them, the primary factor for that event happening was fatigue. Then the second approach is a strategic approach, which is something I'm encouraging you all to do. You should do. And then third is the tactical approach, which is something that is necessary for you to do. So I'm going to really elaborate on these last two, the strategic approach and the tactical approach. So the strategic approach, what I'm talking about here is having some kind of management system in place. So I have written up here fatigue risk management system. You can change that. It can be safety management system. It can be business management system. You probably already have a safety management system in place. You want your fatigue risk management system to fall inside of that safety management system. You don't have to create a whole brand new one. But the point is, every management system has basically the same elements involved. There's an element that addresses organizational commitment and leadership. There's a planning stage where you develop policies, procedures, establish roles and responsibilities. Then you have an implementation phase. Then you do evaluation of those things that were implemented and any corrective action that needs to be applied. And then you have a management review process. And it's iterative. It feeds off of itself to drive continuous improvement. So the strategic approach is basically your guidance in terms of what the purpose of the program is all about, what that program will look like, how it will be run, and how it will remain viable. This is why most safety programs fail. So the strategic approach was what I was talking about. There's a second role for the strategic approach aside from just supporting roles and responsibilities, policies, and procedures. It's also important because we needed to support the tactical approach. The tactical approach is things like training, right? It's where we do the fatigue risk assessment and then we put some controls in place. So what we're talking about here is the recognition of a fatigue risk trajectory. In other words, there are several points along the way before an incident happens that we can say, yes, fatigue was a part of that incident. So I'm going to show you this trajectory and relate it to 4 different intervention points. So the very first point is sleep opportunity. And what this means is that if you have a schedule that allows employees to work ridiculous hours, or if you have a schedule that just doesn't accommodate for time of day factors such as sleeping during daytime hours, then we're going to expect that employees are going to be struggling to get the sleep that they require. So how likely is an employee to be fatigued due to their work schedule? That's the first thing we have to look at. And if there's some gaps here or some issues here, then we're going to see people showing up tired. So the second level and where we can intervene is are employees getting the sleep that they require? How do we do that? Well, a simple thing is simply to ask them or survey them in some manner, but it means also doing things like offering them training in specific elements of sleep hygiene, but also living a shift work lifestyle. It means knowing what foods to eat that promote alertness and what foods to eat to promote drowsiness when you're getting ready to go to bed. And it can also include things like, are we screening for obstructive sleep apnea or other sleep disorders? Or can we offer a screening checklist or tool to the employee so that they can screen themselves? There's plenty out there that are available. And if anybody wants those, I have those. You can certainly reach out to me and I'd be happy to provide them to you. The third area that we focus on is fatigue related behaviors. So in this situation, if somebody shows up and they are obviously tired and we can see them, maybe they've stopped into the break room, we can see they're rubbing their eyes, they're moving slowly, they're talking slowly, and we know that they still have another 4 hours on shift and they're in a safety sensitive role. What are we doing with that person? How are we identifying whether or not they're fatigued and at what point are they crossing a threshold that we really have to be concerned about? How does the employee identify their fatigue related behaviors? More importantly, what are we doing with that employee when we do identify them? There's all kinds of ways that we can monitor and detect fatigue related behaviors, whether it's there's a lot of technology out there, putting in vehicle cameras, there's actigraphy devices on the wrist, there's PVT testing units, there's all kinds of technology out there. Whether or not you want to go that far down the rabbit hole is another discussion. But then if we have gaps along the way here where we don't have good schedule designs, or we've got employees who are showing up tired and we're not doing anything to manage their behavior when they are tired, then what we're going to see are fatigue related errors. And that could be near miss events, that could be close calls. And what are we doing at this point to evaluate those errors when they occur? Are you looking for fatigue related factors? And can we error proof in anticipation of some of these errors? For example, we know that the highest risk time to be driving is between 2 and 6 a.m. What are we doing to manage fatigue under those hours? What kind of error proofing strategies are we putting in place? And then we have, of course, an incident. And when an incident occurs, we can also evaluate that to determine if fatigue was, in fact, a contributing factor to that event. But we have to have the right incident investigation process in place to evaluate for that. So, where do you want to go? What I'm going to show you here is just kind of a sample work plan outline. It's very, very brief. A couple of things I want you to think about. First off, I really encourage you to assess what are your current fatigue risk management efforts. If all you're doing is relying on hours of service regulations, they're insufficient and they're not going to prevent people from showing up tired. And they're certainly not giving you any strategies on what to do when they are tired at the workplace or behind the wheel. The second thing is you might want to develop some kind of guidance document, whether that falls underneath your fit for duty plan or it's a completely separate document. That's for you to decide. But you want to establish the process behind how you're going to manage fatigue. Who's going to be responsible? Are you going to have a fatigue champion? Are you going to have a fatigue risk management team? Are you going to set up roles and responsibilities? Here's what drivers can do, have to do. Here's what supervisors or dispatch has to do. All the roles have to be established. And then you also need to provide some education and training, and not just to the drivers out there. Leadership needs to be educated on the impact of fatigue in the organization. We need a specific structure for supervisors or dispatch. How are they supposed to handle fatigue? What tools are they going to use to identify fatigue or assess a person's fatigue level? And then, of course, the employees, they need strategies, and not just the employees, but their families as well. It's very important to include them in the education and training process because they're very much responsible for providing support to the employee during their off hours. But on top of that, they're the ones maybe that are buying the groceries and giving them the food that they eat and not recognizing the impact on that. And we also know that there's a lot of family breakdown because if the employee can't understand why they're struggling with fatigue and being cranky and irritable and miserable, how can we expect the family to? So we need to incorporate them into that process of education and training. All right, I went through a lot of information very quickly. I'm going to leave it at that, and I'd be more than happy to answer your questions now. And again, I apologize, not sure why we had the disconnect, but we got it back together.
Awesome, Mike, thank you so much. I like the presentation quite a bit, and I learned a lot from you. And I was sharing a story here while you were chatting with one of my colleagues saying that, that thing about when somebody falls asleep at the wheel, you really do not notice that. And I remember one time, this is many, many years ago in my younger prime years, I actually had the same incident when I was driving for about 4 or 6 hours. And I noticed that I had started to have that 1 to 2 second thing.
Yeah.
And I think I did the smart thing. I pulled over, I slept for a half an hour, and it made all the difference in the world because I knew that I couldn't take the chance of doing anything risky.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I talk to a lot of commercial operators, and some of the things they've told me. I had one guy tell me that he travels with tweezers, and when he gets tired, he just starts ripping out nose hairs. And then
I couldn't do that.
And then I had another one who told me that. He goes, no, that's crazy. I wouldn't rip out nose hairs. He said, what I do is I rip out my leg hair. So my question to him was, why are you driving with no pants? But aside from that, so we have, and then one guy told me that when he gets tired, he'll roll down the window and hold his wallet outside, thinking that that would be enough to scare his brain into not having a microsleep. And it's amazing what people are doing to try and stay alert on the road when the only answer is to pull over and have a nap.
Well, and what they're doing, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who are listening, those are not strategic plans on how to fight and have a fatigue management plan. So we've got some great questions here for you. And some of these are questions that I would ask as well. And the first one's very interesting. I've got a question here that says, It's a super interesting topic, Mike. Thank you. My friend is a nurse and has suggested that I take melatonin to adjust to jet lag. Can you explain how melatonin is related to fatigue and how it could or could not help?
Yeah, synthetic melatonin is what we're talking about here, and it's a product that you can buy off the counter, yeah, over the counter. You don't have to have a prescription for it. But the latest research on it, now that we have the longitudinal studies on it, is not nearly as exciting as we thought it would be. We're realizing now that there's a lot of consequences to taking melatonin. It's a hormone, and what it does is our natural hormone of melatonin helps us fall asleep and stay asleep. So
Mhm.
by taking synthetic melatonin, we think we get the same thing, but we don't. It doesn't take us through the sleep cycles the way that our natural melatonin would take us through. There are some side effects to taking melatonin, in particular, um, stomach upset,
Mhm.
a lot of sleep inertia, or waking up in this very groggy state and not really even feeling like you got a good sleep, and that can last for a few hours.
Mhm.
Most importantly, it triggers things like night terrors. And in children, please do not give melatonin to your children. It causes extreme, vivid, horrific nightmares.
Wow.
So definitely not. And melatonin is very individual. So whatever it says on a bottle, it may be completely inappropriate for you as an individual. The needs between individuals is extremely different from person to person, not just in the amount that you take, but when you time the taking of it. So melatonin should only be used under the guidance of a doctor if you can use it. If you're using it for jet lag, if you're traveling somewhere and you kind of want to kickstart yourself to the next time zone, yeah,
Mhm.
no problem. That would be a good time to use it. But as
Awesome.
a regular means of falling asleep, no.
There you go. There's good information. The next question that I have is actually very, very important, and I've seen it happen before. Somebody is asking, my dad has sleep apnea. He snores like crazy, which usually means that nobody else in that vicinity gets sleep either. How can you tell the difference between obstructive and non-obstructive sleep apnea?
The biggest thing, again, we do have little checklists that doctors will use, and again, I can always send one out if anybody wants that. But
Mhm.
generally, the key one that we're looking for is if we hear them stop breathing or gasping and choking in the middle of the night, where you kind of do this snort or this gasp to get the air back in.
I see.
Um, that's the critical one. Men are at higher risk. Anyone who has a large neck, size 17 neck or larger for men, that's a high risk factor, and anyone over the age of 50. It's a high
Wow.
risk factor.
Okay.
Not to say that kids can't get it, kids can get it, skinny people can get it, but the highest risk factor are those plus obesity.
Okay. Now, here's a good one from, I think this needs to be addressed as well. What do you do if you identify fatigue-related behavior, but the employee denies fatigue and refuses your suggested action? I mean, I know you're still the boss, but what would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, it's a due diligence situation, right? And so in that scenario, you definitely want to document it, because if something does go wrong where they do have an incident, you've got it, recorded. Um, the best thing to do for the employees is first off the educational aspect, and I
Mhm.
can guarantee that whenever I do educational training and talk about why they don't recognize when they're about to fall asleep, I see light bulbs turn on over their head. So it's not hard for them to buy into the science when it's well presented to them.
Right.
um, it would make it a lot easier for them to then accept any kind of strategies that you put in place.
Okay. Okay. The next question. How can employees and staff appeal to their management for more sleep opportunities? Of course, they say a nap sounds nice, or a nap room sounds nice. Also, alternatively, how can management better identify and respond to some of these warning signs of tired employees without possibly coming off as offensive of breaking HR rules? No one likes to be told that they look tired.
Yeah, and again, this comes down to the culture that's in place. If you have a
Mhm.
just culture where it's okay to talk about things and the employees know that it's to help come up with a strategy as opposed to discipline,
Mhm.
then it's easier to actually have these kinds of conversations. Encouraging nap rooms. I mean, I'm a big fan of napping, but they have to be done strategically. You have to have a plan for this in place. And it's
Mm.
one thing to say that we allow employees to nap at the job site. We have to be careful with that, because if you have an employee who was kept up all night because a baby was crying, that's one thing. But
Right.
if you have the same employee day after day after day showing up tired and wanting a nap, that needs to be managed differently.
Right.
That person may in fact have a sleep disorder that they're not even aware of, and that person needs to have a conversation with the management team so that they can determine what is it that's causing this. Maybe it's a medical issue, but we need to know how to manage this, because either you're taking on too many hours on the road or too much overtime or whatever that case might be. But we got to figure out how to manage that better
Perfect.
together, right?
Absolutely. I think it's a team effort, like you always say. And so work with the team and it works out great. Mike, you know what? For you to take the time out of your schedule to be a part of us at the speaker series for Safety Driven 2020, we really appreciate it very much. And I know that I listened to the entire thing and I thought this was spectacular because it actually really focuses on one of the biggest problems that we have. If you're on the road fatigue management plan, have one. Like, it's not worth the risk. So thank you so much. We learned a lot. And I wish that we have the opportunity to get you on again sometime in the near future.
Thank you very much.
And a wonderful day to you, Mike. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was Mike Harnett. And honestly, some of the suggestions that she has suggested, I think if you haven't implemented them yet, you definitely should. It's great planning that has to be done. But again, it's just very simplistic. Just have a plan in place. So, all right, so now we are going to do our very first health break, and its first health break was Tracy Steen. Now, again, Tracy Steen is a certified personal trainer and the creator of Move Daily Fitness. She has a background as a clinical therapist and expertise that she uses to help clients reach their full potentials. Tracy's videos can be found on YouTube, where she's got over 30,000 subscribers who visit her weekly to find out free workouts, free nutritional advice, and also a wellness guide as well. So without further ado, let's take our very first health break.
If you're at home, maybe you're in your office, I'd like you just all to grab a seat, have a seat somewhere. I want you to start with feet shoulder width apart. So this is something you can do. Take 10 minutes in between your day, maybe set an alarm, maybe on your lunch break, and get the heart rate up, get the blood flowing. So we're gonna start together here. Feet are shoulder width apart, sitting nice and tall. We're gonna start with 1 minute of sit squats. So shoulders back, you're just gonna stand, reach your hips back, and sit. So even just this small action of sitting, pushing through the heels, shoulders back, and standing up is going to elevate that heart rate. You'll notice in a few seconds you'll begin to feel it start to beat a little bit faster. Okay? Again, this is a great way to wake yourself up. You feel like you're falling asleep in the middle of the day. You want to get a little blood flowing. This is something you can definitely do. Make sure you have a stable chair. Mine has rollers, so I'm gonna have to be a little bit more careful there. All right, move the chair back. Now in a standing position, we're just gonna do some high knees. So I'd like you to go ahead and hit this action right here. All right, so nice and tall. Again, it doesn't matter what you're wearing. I'm dressed for work, but you can again still take a few minutes to move daily and feel like you're getting some blood flow. Taking a little jaunt outside around your office, going and finding some stairs in the back hall. Anything like that is going to help just increase blood flow in the body. All right, 30 more seconds here. You might begin to feel this a little bit in your glutes. I definitely feel my heart rate starting to elevate. You can increase this a little bit by running or lifting hands above the head. Anytime your hands are above your heart has to pump a little bit harder. All right, last 10 seconds here, and then we're gonna move into some stationary lunges. In 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay, let's turn sideways. 1 foot behind, 1 in front. You're gonna do a little pelvic tilt. We're gonna drop straight up and down for 30 seconds aside. All right, here we go. Nice and tall. Feel free to hold on to something if you like. Now, this is a great hip flexor stretch. We did this in the movement in your truck after sitting all day. Again, in your office, oftentimes we sit. unless we have that standing desk, which is recommended. But if not, this is a great way to stretch those hip flexors. All right, switch sides, little pelvic tilts and drop. Keep your shoulders back. This exercise, you want to make sure you're not leaning forward at all, that you're straight up and down. And again, pushing through that heel. Don't want that knee to go over the toe. You want to drop that back knee right down to the ground. Good, and shake that out. We're going to move into a squat roundhouse. So again, feet are shoulder width apart, shoulders are back. I want you to squat down low and then bring that leg up and around as if you're going over a garbage can or something low to the ground. Up and around, just like that. Again, sitting, being stationary, tightens us in our hip muscles, in our hip flexors. This is a nice way to open up those hips. And again, get the heart rate up. Shoulders are back, you're nice and tall. Drop your glutes low. Even wearing high heels, you can do this nice and slow, doesn't have to be quick, but I guarantee you feel like your heart rate has begun to increase, hasn't it? I know it because mine has too. Good, 10 more seconds here. 3, 2, one more right here, and done. All right. One of the things that can happen as you're sitting at your desk is you get that internal rotation of the shoulders. Here's a great way to stretch that out. So I want you to stand about half a foot away from a wall. Now I want you to put your arms on the wall and push your lower back into the wall. Do a little pelvic tilt so the middle part of your lower back is right flush against the wall. Now, that might mean your arms pop off. Try to keep them back against the wall. Head is resting on the wall. You're gonna reach up as tall as you can, trying to keep the back of your hands and your arms on that wall the entire time. Good, knees are soft. And you're just gonna take this up and down, keeping that back on the wall. If I were watching you, I'd try to slip my hand right behind your back to make sure that it's staying on the wall. When I get right here, it's hard for me to actually keep my arms on the wall. I've got some tightness in my front shoulders. But repeat this for about 10 to 12 reps. Sitting for an extended period of time is going to cause that lower lumbar muscle to feel really tight. So stand with your feet shoulder width apart. You can put your hands on your hips. I want you to hinge forward at the waist, rounding down through the lower back. That's going to stretch the hamstrings. Now sit up tall and lean all the way back, pushing your hips forward, looking to the ceiling. Nice and slow, let's repeat that. Round, round, round through the lower back. Again, lengthening through those hamstrings, working into that lower back a little bit, leaning back, chin up to the ceiling. Good, let's do that one more time. Just standing up midday, doing a few of these stretches is going to help so much to keep things from seizing up on you, from tightening up. All right, so just add a few of these stretches into your everyday action. All right, I want you to come to the back of your chair now. Go ahead and just move it forward. You're going to place your hands on top. I want you to take a deep breath in, and as you exhale, I want you to press the chest towards the ground. Now, again, rounded shoulders as you're typing, as you're working on a computer, as you're looking down. We want to open up into that pec muscle just like that by pushing the chest to the ground. Hold that there. And I want you to round up through the back and try to separate your shoulder blades. Okay, just think of them rounding, opening up through the shoulder blades. Again, take a deep breath in, exhale while you push your chest towards the ground and stretch that out. Let's increase the stretch by dropping one hand and letting that pec muscle push towards the ground. Just hold that there for a few seconds. That's it. And round up, switch sides, press the chest toward the ground. You'll feel a nice stretch right in that pec muscle. Again, that gets so shortened when we're seated and rounding in through the shoulders, but this is a great stretch to open that up. All right, let's have a seat again. We're gonna do a few more stretches here just to finish off. You may not have a lot of time in your day, but even throughout the day, in between emails, you can add this stretch. Go ahead and stay seated. Shoulders are low away from your ears, and you're gonna put your hands on one of your chair handles there and just do a nice little torso twist. Drop the shoulders away from your ears. And in this position, you can tilt your neck, just gently bring your ear towards your shoulder. Hold that there for a few seconds. Good, and release and drop your body as low as you can onto your lap there. Just let everything hang. You can let your neck hang down. Hold that there. Rounding through that lower back. Now gently, slowly sit up. And let's put our hands on the other side of our handle here. Drop the shoulders away from the ears. Hold that twist right there. That's it. And go ahead and tilt the neck to one side. Just increasing that stretch into your neck extensors. Feeling that lower lumbar just loosen up a little bit. All right, bring it back to the center, and we're gonna round through the shoulder blades and stretch that middle back muscle right there. We're gonna go into a hamstring stretch. So this can be done on a step, on your chair, something low, even on the ground if you'd like, but if you can lift your leg up this high, feel free. Knee is soft, and you're just gonna hinge forward at the waist. Wow, that feels good. Again, very shortened muscles there, so lengthening through that muscle is gonna keep you limber. And stretches like this that can be done over time and consistently are really gonna help you to not feel so stiff and to keep your muscles and ligaments agile. All right, let's switch sides. Leg is up, knee is soft, don't lock that knee out, and just hinge forward at the waist. So again, you feel that lengthening. Super easy to do in your office. Take 10 minutes. Again, set a timer. 1 minute at each section, doing these nice little stretches. And in 10 minutes, you'll have a nice little heart elevation. Your pulse will get up, your blood will be flowing, and the muscles will be stretched. Okay, last stretch here. You can hold the back of your chair for balance if you need. We're gonna do a quad stretch. Again, lengthening in through that hip flexor. So go ahead and grab your shoes. Now, if you can't manage this because it's too tight, feel free to set your leg behind and lean forward like that instead. But if you can grab it, go ahead and grab your shoes. I want you to try and bring your knees together and lean back slightly. Push your hip towards the opposite wall, or for me, towards my chair here. Standing tall, stretching through my quad muscle, just like that. All right, switch sides, grab your other shoelaces, knees are together. Okay, I'm pushing my hips forward, trying to lengthen out through the quad muscle there. Setting these as a to-do list, reminding yourself by setting a timer. These are essential elements to keeping you fit and healthy and making choices that are ultimately going to lead you down the road to better health. So I hope that you do that this week.
All right. Thank you so much for that great stretch, Tracy. It's important to keep moving always for good health, no matter where you're sitting, whether it's in the office or in a truck. And you know, the beautiful thing about this entire experience is that here are all these people, these experts from different parts of Canada and the world, yet we're all coming together virtually. So I think it's pretty impressive. Our next speaker, who you're going to be really looking forward to talking to, is Norm Ralph. He is the president of Apex Abilities, and he's going to be talking about the aging workplace. Norm has over 30 years of experience in occupational health and safety, and throughout most of those years, he's been a member of the Canadian Society of Safety Engineering. He has served 2 terms as chair of the Society's local chapter, and he's also sat on numerous committees and working groups in the pursuit of OHS, or Occupational Health and Safety in the workplace. Throughout his career, Norm has worked for large organizations in several industries. His company, again, Apex Abilities, provides education, training, and consulting services throughout customized OHS programs and occupational wellness programs. Norm is going to tell us about mature workers in the workforce and how that aging workforce affects the transportation industry. And as you know, one of the biggest topics that comes up in the trucking industry is the aging workforce. Thank you so much for joining us on the Safety Driven Speaker Series 2020. Pleasure to have you on board, and I know everybody's looking forward to hear all that you have to say. So let's jump right into it.
I'm really super pumped to be talking about this particular issue. I think it is a subject that simply isn't getting enough airtime these days. And it's certainly a topic that I think is crucial for both the employer and workers to be thinking about and being engaged in that conversation these days. So let's jump right into it. My first slide here says organizations that are more age ready than their competitors will likely have a significant strategic advantage. So what is it that I mean by that? Well, in other words, I think there is a tremendous opportunity here to capitalize on the growing number of workers that want to continue working past what we would consider to be that traditional retirement age of 65. And for just a few stats here so that we're all on the same page and we know what we're referring to, of course, when we're talking about the older workers, we're talking about baby boomers born between 1946 and 1965. And those first baby boomers reached that age of 55 in 2001. So just carrying on where we we're just looking at a few stats. We talked about the fact that baby boomers reached the age of 55 in 2001. And young workers are considered between the ages of 25 and 34. Now, why I bring that one up is simply to say that, well, the number of young workers, there we go. Well, the number of young workers has increased 18% between 1996 and 2018. The number of older workers has tripled, and that's made it pretty significant. Combined with that as well, we have that declining birth rate. So that has triggered, if you will, these labor shortages that we have in the workplace. And if we look at this next slide here, we can see that close to 1 in 4 people in the labor force is 55 or older. And that number is projected to continue over the next several years for sure. Now that brings us to our first poll question. And the question here is, how many of you know someone? Now, I know we had talked about people being 55, but how many of you know someone that is 65, that normal retirement age, and are still continuing to work in the workplace? Okay, there we've got our answer. 69% of you know someone that is at least 65 or beyond and continuing to work in the workplace. So as I said, these numbers are growing almost exponentially, it seems. So we'll just close that off. And we'll move on. And here's the kind of neat thing is there's lots of reasons for people to want to keep working in the workplace. Number one, I would say is pension top-ups. As many of you know, we have different types of pension plans in Canada. One is called a defined benefit plan. And if you're fortunate enough to be an employee that has that type of a pension plan, it simply means that at the end of the day, when you go to retire, based on the number of years that you worked for an organization and the whole calculation that goes into it, you will have a certain amount of dollars that will be paid out to you for the rest of your life. And there are becoming fewer and fewer of those types of plans throughout Canada. Another one is called the defined contribution plan. That type of plan simply has a pot of money, if you will, that's there at the end of the day. And when that pot of money is used up, there's nothing left in your pension plan. And then, of course, as we know, there are many people, of course, in Canada today that have no pension plans at all. So if we have that ability to top up our pensions, if you will, or our investments, that's certainly a great reason to want to keep working. Social contact is another, for many people, that is the single biggest source of their social contact in their life. And they simply want to continue that on. Sometimes I think as we get older, it maybe gets a little bit harder to either activate or maintain those social contacts. Giving back is another one. Some of the people that have worked for 25, 30, maybe 35 years industry have a lot of information and a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience, and they want to be able to give that back and share that knowledge in some way. So that could be with their existing organization or company, or perhaps even with a different organization. And they want to stay active. And again, for a lot of people, their work is their activity. And so they want to keep on doing that. They're not quite in a position where they want to start going off and necessarily trying some new things. Many people want to start their own business, and we hear about that more and more. Maybe it's a passion of theirs that they've wanted to do. Perhaps it's a hobby that they want to turn into a business, or they simply want to, again, share or have that passion or change their hours to be something that's closer to their heart. And then another one is they simply love what they do. It gives them a purpose in life. I have a neighbor that's exactly falls into this category. He's 69 years old. I asked him about when he was thinking of perhaps retiring, and he said almost exactly those words. He says, no, he says, I love what I do. It gives me great meaning. He says, I don't have a lot of social things that I do outside of work, so I want to continue to work as long as I can. And again, I'm hearing that message more and more from various people. And then this is, I think, one of the big ones here. We are living longer than ever before. And that's no surprise. In 1966, the average life expectancy was 56. Whoops. But here we go. In 2016, 50 years later, the average life expectancy now is 72. And in 2040, the average life expectancy is predicted to be 80 years of age. So we are living longer than ever before. And of course, we don't know exactly how long that's going to be. So again, it sort of lends itself toward that first reason to want to keep working and perhaps top up some of that pension plan. And to go along with that, of course, there are more opportunities today than ever before to continue working. Consulting is a big one that I hear about more and more. People want to get into the consulting business. And again, they've had years and years, decades of education and experience. And oftentimes they want to be able to leverage that or share that with other people. Flexible work schedules is certainly very popular. If people have more control over when they're going to be able to work and kind of pick and choose their own hours, it can be very, very helpful again, and it can be very exciting for a lot of people that are at that later stage in their life. Part-time work is also becoming more and more important, or more. There's more opportunities for it. Let's say I know of a bus driver who now when a bus needs a major overhaul, which is done in Winnipeg, he's subscribed to a list. There's a number of bus drivers that do this. They will fly them to Winnipeg. They will go there, pick up the bus that needs to be brought back to Vancouver, or vice versa. Sometimes they will take a bus that needs to have a complete overhaul. They will drive it to Winnipeg, and then they will fly back. And it's done on as sort of a on-call type of basis, and it's worked out very well for them. Job sharing is another one, and again, I'm hearing this more and more. The only caveat to job sharing is that you really need to have that right job share partner. You need to have someone that's very like-minded to yourself, I think, in order to make that work. But if you have the right job share partner, it can be a real win-win for the organization. Seasonal work is certainly, we're hearing that more and more. Again, I know of another individual, he works for an RV dealership. He leaves in October. This is pre-COVID, of course. He leaves generally in October, goes down to Mexico, comes back up here in April, and works for the rest of the season. Telecommuting, we probably don't need to talk about that too much, other than to say that more and more of us are doing it and hearing about it. Lots and lots of opportunity there. Again, I have a colleague that has his own business. He had an employee that came to him that wanted to resign because her husband had transferred up to Prince George. And after a couple of days, he had thought about this. The owner had thought about it and said, well, wait a minute. What if I could get you set up at home? You really don't need to be in the office here. Everything that she does is on the phone and on the computer. And she agreed that if they could set her up in Prince George, she would be happy to do that. And what a perfect win-win, because he had a great employee that was thrilled to do it, and they didn't have to do any additional education or training. So a perfect win-win in a situation like that. And phased retirement is another one. We're hearing more about this, and I think I really love the idea of phased retirement, and I'll tell you why. Because I think oftentimes, if we've worked for, let's say, 30, 35, or 40 years, and if we've kind of been working in that traditional sort of 9 to 5, 4 or 5 days a week, I think it can be really difficult for a lot of people to go into a kind of a hard stop, if you will, and do nothing, or not go into work every day. So that phased retirement can be very, very helpful, I think, for a lot of the older workforce. And that could be something like going from 5 days a week down to 4 for perhaps a year. And the following year, maybe you go down to 3 days a week, and then down to 2 days. So all kinds of different possibilities with regard to phased retirement. So now, having said all that, are there performance concerns related to the aging workers? I think you'll find this a little bit interesting here, because here's some reasons for poor performance: lack of recognition, a feeling that their work isn't valued, not getting along well with supervisors, high job stress, and a lack of support. So if you think about this, it really has actually nothing to do with the aging or older workers. These are reasons that anybody at any age would have likely poor performance in the workplace. So it's right across the board, and it really has nothing to do with specifically the older worker. In fact, the older workers bring a tremendous amount of value to the workplace, and often that value that they bring it's not even tracked, or it can't be tracked in ways that we typically would track most performance of individuals. And so let's have a look at some of those things. The experienced workers will often lower the costs because they don't leave the organization. And I talked to a woman that works in HR for a very large organization, and she was directly responsible for the hiring in the organization. And I found this amazing. She said to me, if we hire someone today and that person stays at our organization for 5 years, we consider that a win. Isn't that amazing? I mean, I was floored when I heard that. And if you think about previous generations who oftentimes would stay with one company, or maybe two at best, for their entire lives, now it's looking much different. So if we have to continue to hire and again and again and again, you can imagine the costs associated with that. And those experienced workers are not likely to change. They're likely to stay in the same place. And as supervisors, they tend to retain and develop and engage those junior employees. And they do it much more, I would say, willingly, if you will. And so because they are so good as supervisors, they actually decrease the amount of time that other people would perhaps leave an organization. So again, it's just an all-around situation that creates a winning environment for everybody. So there's increased productivity, both for them and I think the people that are around them. They're very great on sharing knowledge, and that knowledge goes both ways. Younger people actually like to work with older experienced workers, and the older workers like to share the information and knowledge that they've gained. So it becomes that win-win. They strengthen group cohesion and collaboration and resiliency, and they also enable innovation. And they strengthen that customer connection. So again, lots of reasons that they are so valuable in the workplace. And again, these are oftentimes intangible. They're things that we don't normally think of when we're looking at performance evaluations. So if we kind of a little bit of a recap on that, we've got lower turnover, we've got greater dedication to the work, we've got positive work values. Generally, we have less frequent absenteeism, and the work is often more accurate because they're making more of the right decisions along the way. So the question might be then, well, okay, do older workers need any special accommodation? You might be a little surprised when I tell you the answer is a little bit of yes and a little bit of no. For some older workers, no special accommodations or accommodations at all would be needed. And for others, there may be some things that we need to certainly consider. Number one, and I think that for most organizations, we should be looking at these as an overall part of our strategic plan when it comes to hiring the older workers. But what are the cognitive demands of the job that we want them to do? So we need to have a look at that. Coupled with what is the workplace environment? Are they driving all day? Are they out on the road? Are they in town? Are they doing long haul type of work? Or are they more in the dispatch side, perhaps in an office environment? And what are the physical capabilities that relate to the type of work that they're going to do or the task demands of the job? So a lot of organizations these days are compiling this list for the different task demands for all the different jobs they have. So they have that on hand, and it's much easier then to be able to compare a person's cognitive demands, the workplace environment, the physical capabilities, along with those task demands for that particular job. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about some of those physical changes that can affect the older workers. So we'll just jump into that a little bit. Muscular strength, number one, just as a general rule, it's around 50-ish when we start to lose a little bit of muscle mass. And generally it's about 1% a year, or pardon me, I think it's around 0.5% a year. And that's whether you're working out or not. We're going to start to lose a little bit of our muscle strength. And again, this is not happening exactly when you hit 50, but somewhere in that realm, we start to lose some of that muscle strength. We will certainly start to lose some of our cardiovascular abilities. We're not going to be able to necessarily perform when we were in our 20s. And that can, not always, but it can affect some of our balance as well. And some of that may be related to sleep. And I think Mike touched on this in the earlier presentation. If we're not sleeping well, and it can affect all of these particular things. But as we get older, as a general rule, sleep can become a little bit more difficult. Vision, of course, is a big one. As we get older, and most of you probably are already aware of this, peripheral vision starts to change as we get older. And again, this is very subtle. It's a very slow kind of process. Glare is another one, particularly at nighttime. Glare can become an issue, but certainly these are things that can be dealt with through medical and so forth. So they're not real big issues that we have to concern ourselves with too much. So the question then might be, okay, so where are the injuries coming from in this sector? And we can see very clearly from the graph here, we do have sprains and we have fractures as the two leading types of accidents that happen. But here's the big thing. Now, you've seen this slide once already. We talked about many of the reasons that we have such good performance from these workers. But here's the other thing. I put this one in red here because remember, we're making more of the right decisions along the way. We're actually having less accidents. We're not doing some of the things perhaps that we would have done or that we see other younger people do. We're simply not doing it at this age. And so we're actually having less of those types of accidents because we're giving more thought to the processes. So as it says here, that experienced workforce is that source of competitive advantage for the employer. And if we start thinking about embracing this now and really putting a plan together on how can we bring older people back into the workplace, or how can we retain them in our workplace, with that plan in place, we'll have some great results. And some of the ways we can do that, first of all, you want to collect and analyze your age profile data. You want to understand how many people are you going to have that are nearing that age of 65? How many people are perhaps even at 55, at 60, and at 65? When are they likely going to be at the point where they're wanting to perhaps retire? And you also want to give some thought as to what kind of skill and experience are you going to lose at that point. You want to initiate conversations with those experienced employees about how they might be able to stay in the workforce or to work in different ways that allow them to stay in the workforce. And I would say as well, if you're someone who is in the workforce now, but you're maybe getting close to that time when you're thinking about retiring, if you're thinking that you'd like to maybe stay in the workplace a while longer too, and your employer's not bringing up the subject and you're not hearing about it in your workplace, maybe it's time you went and were a bit more proactive on that and started talking to the employer about the possibility of being able to stay in the workforce. So how we can tackle some of this ageism, we want to certainly look at things like analyzing pay, bonuses, performance, promotion within the workforce, and recruitment statistics. Have a look at what it's costing you now every time you have to hire someone within the organization. And you can easily figure out how much cost savings there would be if you didn't have to do that each time. And if we're doing all of these things through this, what I call this lens focused on the aging, we're going to be in a much better position to be able to work through the challenges and help the older staff to work effectively in the workplace. Of course, there are things that we should be looking out for. Here's a picture here of, this is a SkyTrain system, and you can see this step that was purchased. This step was purchased, I have another slide here, I'll just show you, I might show it a little better, there we go. This is a step that was purchased essentially, I'll say off the rack, if you will. It's not a custom step by any stretch. They bought many of these for their trains, and they were bought way back in like 50 or probably 80, 84, 85, something like that. If you look at these steps, you'll see the very first one is about 8 inches off the ground. The second step up is approximately 11 inches off the ground. And from the top of that step up into the top of the train is just about 14 inches. Overall, not a big issue. It's certainly not a great issue if you're going up into the train, but when you're coming out the train, it causes your knee to twist slightly and your hips to twist. And then when it was a younger workforce, there was really very little issue with this, but as the workforce was getting older, they recognized that this was going to become a problem. They couldn't find one, actually. They couldn't find something that was going to be, they couldn't find a product that had the right measurements for them. And so they had to get a little bit creative. This is simply a prototype that you're looking at here to give an idea of what the proper steps would look like. And so they're taking those proactive steps to ensure that we aren't going to be hurting people and that they can continue to work safely in the workplace. Here's another example here. These are, if we're got workers that have to do a lot of heavy lifting, if we can look for ways or devices that can help them to do that lifting, those are kind of things we need to look for. High contrast print on signage can be very helpful, of course. Increasing the size of printing and instruction on memos and labels. Using task lighting where possible can be very helpful as well. Minimizing slips, trips, and falls by reducing the climbing, working at heights where possible, marking steps and floor surfaces for visibility and anti-slip. And also remember this, whatever we do, that if we're doing it with the sort of lens, again, if lack of the right term perhaps, but this lens on helping the aging worker, everything we do or anything that we do to help them helps everybody else in the organization as well. So it is a bit of a win-win. So again, if we start looking at these things, again, they're going to benefit everybody within the workplace. So that brings us to the poll question. We are going to talk a little bit more about some of the things we can do. But our next poll question, has your workplace engaged in the process of making changes in the workplace with the older worker in mind? Okay, so quite a high number. 42% said yes, they have, 58% said no. And I also suspect there might be some cases where we don't know. There may be some things going on. We're just not sure what they are. We haven't heard about them. So that's quite a high number. I'd like to see a little bit higher than that. I think as time goes on, I think we're going to see that more and more, because I think we are starting to see workers that are recognizing exactly what I'm referring to here as the competitive advantage. So we're going to carry on talking about a few more of these things that we can do to help the aging workforce. Rotate work assignments to avoid repetitive stress is certainly a key. We've got consider and implement exercise and wellness programs. Here again, I think you have to use some discernment. You have to really have the right types of programs, the right type of wellness programs as well. I'm not suggesting for a second here that you would have buy them a gym pass and cross your fingers and hope they go. It needs to be a program that's well designed, that you know the older workers are going to be able to take advantage of. We need to consider flexible work programs, that part-time work if it's available. And I think for many of these things, we need to start looking at this with the attitude that we can do it. Can we assign work schedules that help to avoid fatigue? Multitasking, I don't think we need to go down there. I think most of us already recognize that multitasking simply doesn't work. That's long gone. We need to encourage reporting of aches and pains, right? We want to know that if people are having issues, we want to know about it before it becomes problematic. And again, if management starts to adopt this idea of this supportive attitude, that people can do it, I mean, years ago, the thought was at a certain age, you really couldn't do that type of work. And now we're finding out it is just the opposite, that there's so much value in having the older worker in the workplace. So as this slide says here, to be age ready requires that thoughtful and careful analysis of the workplace. And that's where we're kind of going with this. We're saying, look, employers need to put a plan together to look through all of the issues so that they can make clear choices about bringing the older workers back to the workplace or retaining them in the workplace. And as it says here, organizations that actively leverage the older worker will be in the best position for being able to hire and retain those older workers. As it says here, according to a report by Trucking HR Canada, we will have a shortage of 25,000 truck drivers by 2023. And that 61% of trucking jobs in Canada reportedly went unfilled in 2019, and that's expected to increase by 25% by 2023. So again, if it's for no other reason, there's lots and lots of reasons to want to hang on to the skilled and experienced workers that are already in many of our workplaces. And I'll just leave this up here for just a minute or so. I want you to be able to copy this link down if you're in that process. If you've already started on the process, but you want to get some more information on how to build all those components that you need for being able to retain the older workers in your workplace, this is a great website. They've got lots of information and can help you put that whole plan together, as well as give you lots of more tips and tricks and insight beyond what I was able to provide for you today. So that's the end of this presentation.
We do have some questions for you. The first question I have is the following. Any recommendations for young managers supervising older managers? Sorry, let me repeat that again. Any recommendations for young managers who are supervising older workers that have been in the company for longer than they have? I know I experienced this before, so how would you deal with something like that?
The very first thing I always think of in a situation like that is to recognize, first of all, that not everybody in an organization wants to be necessarily those quote unquote leaders, whether it's a supervisor or a manager or higher up. So, you know, we've all got our kind of place and our calling, but to comment on some of the comments I made on the presentation, we all bring value, and we all bring some experience and wisdom into the workplace. And I think that's what we need to recognize and think about more with regard to the older worker. If I was a young supervisor, what a gift, because I've got someone who's got all that experience and that can bring that. So I would look at ways to leverage that and look at it as a real positive.
Absolutely. I agree with you 110%. And I think that's one of the things that's missing is just the recognition that this person does bring so much value. The next question is kind of related to that is, how can you help motivate the older employees to adapt to new processes? Now, whether it's like we're doing something right now, which is the digital world, so that some of these processes might be what they think is new or young, especially when they seem resistant to trying new things, embracing new ideas. How can we help motivate these older workers in the workforce?
That I love that. It's a great question. It's a great question. No, I think it is. There's a stigma there, and I'm going to say that quite frankly. I don't think that the older workers have as much problem adapting to a lot of the technology as we oftentimes think.
Interesting.
I'm betting there's probably a good percentage of people out there, older people that have had maybe some technical issues with their, let's say, their computer, and they said, "Boy, oh boy, do I need to get a young person here to get this sorted out." The reality is that many of the issues that come up technically, they're very willing to jump into, and they're very willing to sort it out and figure it out. And remember, it's a two-way street. So young people like to learn from the older, experienced workers as well. And I think a lot of that is really just a stereotype. I don't believe it's accurate at all.
Oh, you know what? I completely agree with you. I remember when my dad got an iPad, he would ask me a couple of things, but then he dove right into that thing, and he can do all the things that I could do and probably more. So I think you're right. I think it could just be a stigma.
If anything, Jag, if I could just add on to that,
Absolutely.
one word: fear. There may be some fear, but once they get over that piece, and they'll take off, just as you said, and they'll continue learning. Yeah.
All right, another question we have. Norm, do you see a benefit between older and younger people doing more job sharing, or is it really just about the right fit? Is personality and skill set more important than age or availability?
Well, that's a little bit trickier. So typically when we think of job sharing, it's not been my experience that we see a lot of, say, an older worker mixed with a younger person. My experience has been typically it'll be somebody of the same age or vintage, if you will, that are both kind of getting to that point where they're now thinking of retiring, but want to do it on a slightly different structure. And that's where we'll see. That's where I said in the presentation, you really want to have somebody that's a good match for you, somebody that kind of along the same thinking process, somebody that you can rely on. Because remember, it's not just you work one week and maybe I work the next week. It could be I want to take a month off and I need somebody that can fill in. And likewise, when you go on vacation, I'll be there to support you and that type of thing.
Yeah, that's a very good answer. I like that. Relating to the first question, Norm, especially working with those employees who are resistant to change and attribute to the younger change, we're going to move to the next one. It says, many of the concessions you suggested seem to be for all ages, things related to fatigue, body strains, knee hazards. Are employers ever resistant to implementing your recommendations for older workers, or do they pretty much accept and say, yes, we should be doing this?
Yeah, I think it's becoming more and more common now that again, I think there just hasn't been this focus on the aging workforce that we have today. Like I said, I think any of these things that we do, I think they benefit everyone, absolutely. But if we're going to put a plan together for our older workers to kind of to help us as an organization strategically figure out the best fits, this needs to be a part of that plan. So how are we going to do that? And have we looked through the workforce? Have we looked at our injury stats to trying to determine where some of the obstacles might be, and can we make some improvements in those areas? Have we looked at them? Is essentially what we're suggesting.
Gotcha. Okay. And the last one, we have another one. It says, you often hear of many older workers mentoring new or younger workers say, do as I say, not as I do. And the person, Mike Stortz, thank you for your question. He just wants a comment from you on that.
Okay. Well, I can only speak from my experience with these things, and it's really not what I've seen per se, because with the older worker, and what makes them so valuable, I believe, in the workplace is the attitude that they come with. And typically, and again, and I might be generalizing a little bit here, but the older worker, they're at this stage in life where the sort of big challenges are behind them, if you will. The kids have been launched, their mortgages oftentimes are paid down, their debts are paid down, and now they're at this time in life when they don't have all those hangups and those worries. And I want to, this might sound a little philosophical here, Jag, but it's that time in life when you'll find that people are more genuine, because they kind of got nothing to lose here. And so if I want to engage with somebody, and I think most of us do, and it's not, when it comes to somebody being more genuine, there's more presence to them, if you will. And people can sense that. And when we sense that, those are the people you want to hang out with. Those are the people you want to listen to. And so that's one of those factors that the older worker brings into the workplace that I think we're not really looking at, we're not tuned into, but it's a tremendous value that they bring in that sense.
Wow. I've learned a lot from you, Norm. This is fantastic, especially talking about this topic because it is so prevalent in today. And like you said, 61% of the jobs are not being fulfilled. It's going to go up. This is an interesting topic, and I'm glad that we had you as an expert to come out and talk to this thing. So thank you once again for being a part of the speaker series in 2020. And I look forward to hopefully meeting you again one day and doing this all over again.
Thank you, Jag. It's been great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Norm.
All right.
All right. So that was Norm. And, again, it's one of those things that you just have to deal with. And I have a quick story to tell you before we jump to the next health break. And this is important because what he said really makes sense, is that you have to really work together. There's a movie called Gone in 60 Seconds, the new one, not the old one. It's where you have the older folks joining with the newer folks to do something illegal, which is boost a bunch of cars and steal them. But what happened was that they both brought together these unique set of skills, and they merged together. And rather than being fearful of each other, they worked together and they got the job done. So work together, it's the best thing. Now, we're gonna move on, and we're gonna be talking about a couple of more things. We've got still more interesting things for you to do. But however, right now, we're gonna take this time to do our next health break. It's a 10-minute health movement for truck drivers. And so it's with Tracy Steen again. And we again thank her for her presence to be here to teach us some good stuff. Take this time to stretch. If not, take a bio break if you need as well. After you come back in about 10 minutes after the video of stretching or bio break, we're gonna do our next prize as well. So you don't wanna miss that. So presenting again, Tracy Steen on the health break.
So we're gonna take a few minutes right now. I would love it if you would join me. You don't need your truck. You can do this right in the comfort of your own home right now. Let's practice some of these moves. Let's become familiar with some of these stretches so that after a long haul or after a day of driving, you can incorporate these into your day and move daily. Now, I know you think about your truck as your place of work. It can also be a place where you work on your physical and mental wellness, even if it's just a little bit. We're going to start with some stretches here. Think about it. If your wrists are in the same position for an extended period of time, you're going to have some tightness in that area. So I want you to start by taking your steering wheel as a guide and simply pressing your fingertips on the top of the wheel to stretch through the wrist. You're thinking about lengthening through the forearm here. Okay, getting right into the back side of the forearm as well. Now you can take the wrists, flip them over, and do the stretch this way. So when your truck is stopped, this is a great way just to stretch out those wrists, stretch out your forearms. Okay, you can come to the side of your wheel just like that as well. And then take your hands to the bottom of the wheel and stretch that out. Good, you'll feel the lengthening in those muscles that have been shortened while you've been driving. So a nice wrist stretch around your wheel is a great thing when you're stopped. Your lower lumbar muscles can get really tight from sitting in the same position. So again, when your truck is stopped, go ahead and place your right hand on the left side of your wheel and slowly rotate, dropping your shoulders, keeping them away from your ears, and just feeling again that lengthening through the lower back area. Hold each stretch between 15 and 20 seconds, and you'll feel that loosening begin to happen. Then take your left hand, place it on your right wheel, and do the same in the opposite direction. Just hold. Make sure your shoulders are dropped nice and low. You don't want to shrug them up. Nice and low. Away from your ears. And again, you can go side to side a few times, holding each stretch for again between 15 and 20 seconds, just to feel that lengthening and loosening in your lower lumbar. Your shoulders are another area that can begin to internally rotate as you drive. So you're sitting for a long period of time, you start to get tired, and what starts to happen? You start to round in the upper shoulder blades. Well, we want to make sure that those are rotated back and tall. So even while you're driving, pay attention to your posture. To stretch that out, you can go ahead and grab your opposite elbow with the opposite hand, pull that elbow towards you, and you'll feel that lengthening through that middle back muscle right behind. That can often get pinched from sitting still for a long period of time, so you want to lengthen that back out. So hold that for 15 to 20 seconds, switch sides, and pull across the body. So you're thinking of separating your shoulder blades, rounding through the shoulder blades and opening them back up. That's it. Do each side a few times and feel that good stretch in that back there. Next, I want you to do a few neck stretches. Again, your head's in a stationary position. So be sure that you actually twist to the side and hold it. You're going to lengthen through these neck extensors right at the side of your neck there. So everyone try that. Drop your shoulders away from your ears and then turn all the way to the other side and hold. Again, you're lengthening through that area there. I want you to try dropping chin to chest. And you'll feel that right up your back neck extensors right there. And then go ahead and put chin to the ceiling, stretching through this neck right in the front there. To increase these stretches, now I want you to take your hand and just gently on the one side, tilt to the side. So your ear is going towards the ceiling there. Again, you're going to give a little extra stretch and switch sides here. Just a little extra stretch there. And that's good. After a long ride, you probably feel like those pec muscles right in here are quite shortened. After all, you're sitting in this position for a long period of time and those muscles haven't been lengthened. So a chest stretch is a great way to do that. You can go ahead and take that arm, even place it behind you and lengthen in through this pectoral, major and minor muscles right there. I like to hold each side, again, for about 15 to 20 seconds, and you will really feel like that has been tight for a long time. This stretch is so great. Go ahead and switch sides here. Take your arm behind. Even if you can reach the headrest of the other side, anything where you can open up. This could also be done standing outside of your truck with one arm on the door and then just opening up just to lengthen again through that chest. You're going from anterior rotating to exposing and lengthening out into those muscles right there. Once your ride is complete, it's a great idea just to stand up out of your seat and start doing some front and back bends. Again, you've had this shortened hip flexor for an extended period of time. Now we want to lengthen it back out. And you can start by doing some front and back bends just like this. So nice and slow to the front, return to the back, and feel again those abs stretching. You're feeling those lower back muscles stretching. And it's just a nice slow movement. Now you can take it side to side. A little side bend right here, lengthening through your obliques, and switch sides right here just to stretch that out. Okay, another one side to side. And here. Great. Now let's stretch the legs out a little bit. Let's do an IT band stretch where you're going to cross one leg in front of the other. I want you to reach up into the ceiling, take a deep breath in, and slowly hinge forward, down, down, as low as you can go. We're trying to lengthen out those hamstrings that again have been shortened by sitting. So holding this stretch and just again getting as deep as you can go without hurting yourself. You want to feel that stretch. A slight pull, but no pain. This should feel on that IT band right up the side of your leg. Let's switch sides. Other leg isn't crossed. Deep breath in. And I want you to hinge forward at the waist. All the way down, down as low as you can go. And holding that there. Good. And I slowly round up through the back. We can stand up tall, roll those shoulders back right here as well. Bring them up high and then drop them as low as you can go. Just like that. Another great exercise is to add some walking lunges or even stationary lunges into your move. You can stand outside your truck, take a step forward, drop your back knee, continue on, or you can just do a stationary position where one foot is in front, one behind, a little pelvic tilt here, and shoulders back. You're going to drop nice and low and push through the heels. Now the benefit of this is that you're extending again through those hip flexors. So let's try that. One foot in front, one behind. You can hold on to something and just drop nice and low, push through the heels, come back to standing. I want your shoulders back nice and tall. And even if you couldn't manage this, you could go into a stretch position here where your back heel is into the ground. You're leaning forward as low as you can, stretching through that hip flexor, that tight hip area, and opening it right back up. You can add a few hip openers here, up and around, just to get that ball and socket, that hip ball and socket, nice and loose after hours of driving. And my final suggestion is for you to go on a little walk. You want to get that heart rate up. You want to elevate the blood flow. You've been sedentary for hours. Now it's time to get the blood pumping and the heart working. This helps reduce inflammation, disease, and decay. So if you can go around your truck a few times, maybe down the road and back, if you can't do any of those, maybe even some standing high knees like this, go ahead and give that a shot. 2 minutes of this will definitely get the heart rate up. 2 minutes of squats just like this will definitely get the heart rate up. 2 minutes of stepping up to your cab and down will get the heart rate up, or going for a nice walk before dinner, before you shower. That's a great way, again, to increase your heart rate, which decreases inflammation, disease, and decay.
All right, thank you so much again to Tracy for keeping us moving. And again, these exercises are meant for you to use so that you stay healthy, have a clear mind, and a clear focus. Next up, this is something that you've been waiting for as well. We are very fortunate to have our next speaker with us. His name is David Coletto, and he's our keynote speaker for today. David is going to be addressing work and leadership in the millennial age. Now, he is regularly invited to speak to many groups across Canada, so we're very fortunate to have him with us, joining us today so that you can hear from him as well. David is the CEO and founding partner at Abacus Data, a research and strategy firm that's based in Ottawa in Canada. Although it was founded only 8 years ago, it's become one of Canada's most respected market research firms, so congratulations to the team. David is one of Canada's leading experts on generational change and millennials, who make up the largest portion of the working age population. Today, David is going to talk about the way the modern workplace is changing and the role that millennials have in that change, and also in the trucking industry as well, which is our industry. He'll explain how technological change and a new generation of employees is affecting the workplace and what generational change means for motivating and engaging that generation. So this will be a great follow-up to what Norm was talking about as well.
Start by thinking about how much our world has changed, and I want to think how much that world has changed, before even the pandemic started, which I'll talk briefly about, and its impact on all of this. But if you think about our world, and one way to measure change is to ask ourselves, what are the largest companies in terms of their value in the stock market? That's an indicator of what investors value. And if we go back to 2006, 14 years ago, these were the 5 largest publicly traded companies in North America: ExxonMobil, GE, Microsoft, Citigroup, and British Petroleum. You had 2 energy companies, 1 bank, a conglomerate, and 1 tech company. And if we fast forward to today, what we find is that the 5 largest publicly traded companies, 4 of them are tech companies. One is the Saudi energy giant oil company. But if you look at those top 5, Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon are in the top 5. If you look at what number 6 is, it's Facebook. And so we ask ourselves, what does that tell us? What does that tell us about our workplace? What does it tell us about consumer market? And I bet that most of us on this call today have used at least one of these brands, maybe in the last hour, maybe on this call right now, on the device we use. But if you think about our last day, maybe we've used more than one of these. And I think the growth of these companies, the value that people place in them, is indicative of how our world has changed. And so when I think about generational change, I don't look at it in a vacuum, because I think to understand what I call the big reset, and I think of the big reset as being applying both to the employment market, the workplace, as well as how we shop, what we buy, how we make decisions. It's really been driven by 2 key factors, right? Generational change over the last 20 or 30 years, along with technological change, which has been accelerated in part by generational change, but has also happened independent of it. And when those 2 forces come together, we get very different circumstances, expectations, preferences, and ultimately behaviors from those who use it. And I think what the pandemic has done, despite the challenges and the harm it's caused for so many people, I think the lasting impact will be it has accelerated this reset. It's accelerated these changes that we have seen, and the workplace and the expectations of workers and how they think about work will be not too far out where we would have ended up. It's just we got there much faster. And so I want us to think about those factors as we move forward. Now, when we ask Canadians, I do survey research, surveying thousands of Canadians every week in the work that we do. A few weeks ago, we asked Canadians, to what extent do you think the pandemic is going to change things? And I think a starting point is to recognize that Canadians of all ages, of all generations, believe that this pandemic requires us to rethink how we work and run the economy. I've been doing public speaking on this topic for years now. I've been going to the groups like yours and others, making the case that generational change is something we need to think about, and that employers and leaders and managers who have a mindset, who understand how younger generations think, what drives them, what role technology plays in their lives, I think we'll have an easier job at not just working with them day to day, but will ultimately be more successful in recruiting and retaining and engaging that generation and growing their business and keeping the business sustainable over the long term. That matters even more today than ever before, because of what the pandemic will mean to the workplace of the future and what people care about. In fact, if I had given this talk in January or February before the pandemic took hold, I would have talked a lot about the differences between older and younger generations, baby boomers and millennials. And I still think there are big important differences between those groups. But one of the things I've been observing over the last number of months is that the behaviors and the preferences and the choices that those generations are making are actually coming closer together, I think. That we're being forced, all of us, to live more touchless, more digital lives. If you work in an office, you've probably been working from home more than you ever have. Maybe you're still and only going to be working from home. And all of these drivers are bringing generations closer together, to the point where that I think my mother and father, who are in their 60s living in Toronto, are now far more similar in their day-to-day lives than my sister and I, both millennials. And that's largely because they've been forced to change how they behave and how they act. So I'm going to talk about work and leadership in the millennial age, but I'm going to do it through a lens of I think, a lot of understanding of the trucking and logistics sector. I've worked closely with Trucking Human Resources, or HR Canada. We did a big survey, which I'll share some of the results for. I've presented in front of a number of the Trucking Association conferences. And so I've gotten to know the industry and those in it fairly well. And I think there's a lot that we can take from both the research we've done and the broader understanding about generational differences. Now, there's three things I want you to take from my talk today. The first is, despite everything you've heard about generational change, about different generations, I think it's always important to start at the fact that we are far more similar, whether you're a millennial like me, a Gen Z who's younger, a Gen X or a baby boomer. We're all far more similar in what we want out of life, what we want out of work. And we often over-exaggerate those differences, right? You've heard thousands of words, hundreds of minutes of content have been produced talking about how just different we are, right? Sometimes we treat different generations like we're animals at a zoo, and we're looking at each other through the glass and not really feeling we know each other. In fact, if you're not a millennial or Gen Z, if you're from an older generation, odds are you know us better than you think. We're your kids, we're your nieces and nephews, we're your brothers or sisters, and you have a better sense of us than you think. But the second point I hope you take is that there are some differences that matter. There's some differences in how we were raised and the role that technology plays in our lives that just makes us think and act slightly differently. And we approach problems, we approach aspects of our lives in slightly subtle ways that can have big impacts to how we communicate, to how we see things, and ultimately how to lead us to being more successful in achieving the collective objectives that we have as teams going forward. And the third point is, when we talk specifically about the trucking sector and we look at the future, one of the things that I believe is that, the critical nature that your sector plays to our economy in our lives every single day is not well understood among younger Canadians. And how do you appeal and make both the work and a career in the industry appealing has to be based on an understanding of what we think about it. And I'm going to share some data on that and hopefully give you a good sense of how young Canadians view the industry. Now, just quickly, two stats that I think are important to set the context. The first is the average age of a truck driver in Canada is 55 years old, much higher than the average age of a working age person, so a much older workforce. At the same time, only 15% of truck drivers in Canada are under the age of 30. And so we're creeping fairly quickly towards a situation where there needs to be substantial generational change in the workforce. And that's going to create even more challenges, not only replacing retiring workers, and drivers, but also the conflict that can come as those workplaces become multi-generational. That's the whole point and effort of today's sessions. And so as we think about that, it's important to understand first that, who are we talking about? And I'm going to focus my attention today on the bottom two generations on this chart, the millennials and those in Generation Z. And different definitions are used to describe them. I use millennials as those born between 1980 and 2000. And then Generation Z are those born from 2000 onward. And when you look at the size of this generation, the reason why there's so much attention being paid to them is there's a lot of us, right? We make up now half of the Canadian population. There are more millennials and Gen Z than there are baby boomers and Generation Xers. And so we are increasingly a large component of the workforce and have influence on the decisions that leaders from older generations are going to make. I started giving speeches and doing work on this almost 10 years ago. And at the time, millennials were only at that point being talked about. Now we are overanalyzed, probably the most overanalyzed generation in history. But what I've come to realize is when you look at both millennials and Gen Z from a bird's eye view, there's a few points that are important to note about them. The first is it's the most ethnically and culturally diverse generation in Canadian history. It's the most tech savvy, the most entrepreneurial. Millennials and Gen Z are more likely to start a business by the time they're 30 than any generations before them, largely because technology enables us to do that. It's the most educated generation in history, and it's the first generations in which more women will get a post-secondary degree than men. And so those dynamics about the role that men and women play in households and in the workplace and in broader society are fundamentally changing, as they should, for the better, but there's still change that's creating new dynamics for us to consider. And when we think about millennials in particular, it's important to note that, if you think that I'm almost the first millennials turned 40 this year, we're no longer kids. Gen Z are still young, and many of them aren't even in high school yet. But for millennials, most of us have now left post-secondary and are starting our own families, are looking to buy a home or even get settled. And so I think when you think about millennials in particular, is to not think of us as children, but as adults who may have developed later and may have achieved milestones later in our life, but are doing so, but are now starting to achieve those things. Now, when we talk about these generations and what makes them different, I point to two primary factors. I think you can understand a lot about a generation by really doing a deep dive in understanding how they were raised and by the role that technology plays in their life. And in my mind, when you look at both millennials and Gen Z and you compare them to my parents' generation, the boomers, my cousin and uncle's generation, the Gen Xers, there are some substantial differences, right? And when we think about how we were raised, and I'm going to talk about the typical upbringing. Many millennials in this country have experienced very different upbringings. And so I'm going to talk about the typical experience. And that typical experience, I think, can be summed up in three parts. One is, I think we were a generation that was focused more on than ever before, right? We became the center of attention, right? I think about how my grandparents held dinner parties and how my friends now hold dinner parties, right? When my grandparents had their friends over, the kids would sit to the side. They may be fed different food. They weren't really engaged. Today, kids are at the adults' table. They're probably fed first, and they're engaged in the conversation. They became the center of attention. Secondly, we were raised during the self-esteem movement, right? We saw a wholesale shift in how the education system and society generally raised millennials, right? We were told we could achieve so much, that we could achieve anything we wanted. We weren't allowed to fail. We got trophies for often participating. And you hear all of these kinds of stereotypes that have come to define us. But in many ways, those stereotypes are just simply a different experience. And that experience carries over into the workplace and what we expect, right? More equal relationships, being asked to be part of decisions. We were consulted for most of our lives. On top of that, I think we were in a way overprotected. I often show this, if you remember the baby on board sign, right? That appeared in the 1980s. And I don't think it was a coincidence that boomers, my parents' generation, put that sign in their cars as a signal to others to say, stay away. There's a kid here and I'm going to protect them, right? Our parents really acted like our protectors. And one person I met, a doctor, physician at one of the conferences I attended, described millennial parents as snowplows, right? They clear the way for their kids and they make things easier. And so that experience of how we were raised in a world that was far more protected, was far more equal, was more engaging, I think created a workforce that expects those same things when we get into our jobs and into the workplace. Now, at the same time, all of those shifts that we saw in how we were raised also happen at a time of immense technological advancement, right? If you think about our lives today and the role that our device plays and how much we can do with this device, and think back to even when I was in university and just got my first cell phone, how much that device has played a role in our lives, you start to understand the impact that technology has had, right? Think about how we make decisions. We no longer trust experts as much as we did. There's been a decline in deference. We now seek input from the mass, right? Think of Rotten Tomatoes or Internet Movie Database. There wouldn't be, Siskel and Ebert, if you remember them, they wouldn't really have a gig today. Nobody really cares what movie critics think. We just see what millions of people who saw the movie think, and we aggregate that up, and that guides our decision making. We also have the power to amplify good and bad events in a way that previous generations never did, right? By sharing content, we have more power to hold people in positions of authority accountable than we've ever had before. And so that power comes higher expectations and a sense of entitlement that people often feel millennials and Gen Z have more than earlier generations. But it's not really entitlement, it's simply a different dynamic that exists. Lastly, I think technology has also changed the way we get information. And this is really important when you think about how you deliver safety programs, or how you train us, or how you get us on the same page. I often describe millennials as the just-in-time generation, and I think Gen Z is very much the same way. I don't instinctively know how to change a tire on a car, or maybe replace a button on my shirt. But I think I know, and every millennial and Gen Z knows, that YouTube will show me how, right? And so learning is something that we don't learn how to do things, we learn how to find answers to problems we anticipate are going to come down the line. And so that is another dynamic, I think, that's new and that technology has created. Another thing that's important about communication is how we get information. I live in Ottawa right now, and about 2 years ago, we had tornadoes touch down just west of the city here. And those tornadoes happened on a Friday. And luckily, most people were okay. There was some significant damage west of the city. But on Friday, the tornadoes happened. And then on Monday, about 4 days later, I got a text message from my sister, Stephanie, and she lives in Toronto. At the time she was 30, she has a child, she's an adult by all accounts. And she sends me a text and says, "Hey, David, I just heard about the tornadoes. Are you okay?" And I thought about it for a minute, and I said, I responded saying, "Oh, everything's fine. We're really lucky. We lost power for a few hours, but all good." And then I thought, well, hold on a second. Like, it took you 4 days to reach out and say everything, to see how I was doing. And so I asked, "Okay, Steph, like, everything's good, but like, what took you so long?" And her answer confirmed all the research that I've been doing and all the data. And she said to me, "Well, look, I don't subscribe to any newspapers, certainly. I didn't watch any live TV this weekend, so I didn't see any news. I don't listen to the radio. I don't have any news apps on my phone, so I didn't get any notifications. And you didn't post anything on Facebook, and I didn't talk to Mom. How would I have found out?" Right? And that story confirms the potential isolation that young people are in today, that if they are not following people who have different views or different interests, they may not be exposed to what's going on outside of their own little bubble. And so we have the tendency to have those bubbles. And I think more and more, regardless of our generation, we're seeing the role that technology plays in doing that. All of these two experiences, both technology and how we were raised, leads to what I call a shift lens, right? And understanding the shift that I think we've seen, and 5 factors that are important to understanding these new generations. The first is, as I've already alluded to, we are self-educators by nature, right? We've had access to technology and the internet for far more of our lives. And Gen Z in particular has always had access to unlimited amounts of information. that we don't rely on other people. We don't need other people, and we can always fact check at any moment. At the same time, these are two generations in which image matters even more than it ever has. And what I mean by image is the choices we make in our day-to-day lives, where we work, what we wear, where we shop, what we eat, for those who get married, where we get married, really matters because we share so much of those experiences online. Like, go onto someone's Instagram feed, right? The choices of photos that we post on Instagram is meant to elicit an image of ourselves, a brand. And we're constantly thinking about curating that image and brand. Some people joke sometimes that a baby isn't born in a millennial or Gen Z world unless that photo is posted on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or now TikTok or Snapchat, right? There's endless numbers of these platforms that people use, but being self-educators and image-driven is important. I haven't mentioned this, but by birth, as I said, we're a hopeful generation. 85% of Canadian millennials in a survey we did a few years ago said they were told growing up that they could achieve anything they wanted. But along with the pandemic and economic disruption and uncertainty around the world and climate change, we are increasingly anxious about that future, right? I know in British Columbia, particularly in the Lower Mainland, housing affordability is the top issue for millennials, right? Being able to achieve that dream of home ownership, even today, despite the worst economic recession probably in any of our lifetimes, it still feels so far and so difficult to achieve. And so that anxiousness is something to understand when you think about our state of mind and our mental health and how that plays into the work we seek and how we perform on the job. We also seek impact and passion. The survey that we did and others have confirmed that apart from pay and benefits, which are the table stakes of any driver for whether we work in particular sectors or not, feeling that we are making an impact, that the work that we do every day, that if I'm going to get up at 7 o'clock and get into work for 40 to 50 hour work weeks, at the end of the day, I've got to feel that there's some impact, that I'm making a difference in some way. Now, for some young people, that's about doing good, right? It's about solving big challenges or helping people. For others, all it needs to be is that every day somebody's noticed that I've made a difference. Somebody has communicated a benefit. I've noticed the work that I've put in. And so that need for feedback is so instinctive and so critical to these younger generations, in part because we've always had it. We've always had educators and parents and coaches and mentors giving us feedback, giving us trophies, giving us support. And a lot of that is generally positive and constructive. And so what we find in study after study is that younger generations in particular are most motivated when they get consistent and constant feedback. I find it on my own team. I lead a team of 6 millennials and Gen Zers, and I find the same way. They need constant attention and constant feedback. And that feedback needs to be personal and it needs to be customized. It's not enough just to say, hey team, good work, everything's great. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, I think this is a generation unlike any other that have come to expect transparency and control in their lives. Transparency on why decisions were made the way they are, on a sense of some control over those decisions. I don't think it's reasonable or everybody believes that they should be making the decisions quite yet, but they want to feel at least that they've been engaged and that they understand why that decision made, right? People talk about millennials, another term for them is Generation Y. I like to call them Generation Y, W, H, Y, because they're constantly asking questions. I've done some work in the military. I went out to Esquimalt at the Navy base there, and I presented to a bunch of commanding officers who have struggled to engage young recruits and young officers because they come at questions and problems and relationships in a very different way, where it used to be you don't question your commanding officer, right? You don't ask, he gives an order or she gives an order and you say why. No, that's not how the system works, but they're finding more and more that they need to be more flexible and open, and they need to have answers to questions that are asking them about why things are the way they are. And so the question that I always think about then, as that relates to your sector, is trucking millennial friendly? And millennial friendly can mean many things, but at the most it means, is it open to the mind frame that millennials and Gen Z bring to that workplace? And so we did a big study about 2 years ago with Trucking HR Canada. We interviewed 2,000 millennials across the country, aged 18 to 38. And we asked them a whole bunch of questions about the trucking sector, trying to understand what is the opportunity and how to get more people, more young people in particular, interested in working in trucking. And we used long haul trucking as the most challenging job to fill, right? And what we learned was that, in fact, there is opportunity out there, despite the challenges in finding young people to fill many jobs in the sector. We find that 12% of millennials say they are interested in a long haul trucking career. And if you actually extrapolate out, that's a lot of people open to it and are interested in it. Another 42% we would describe as not necessarily interested in long haul trucking, but interested in a more blue collar career, trades, working with their hands, not necessarily, in a creative or professional kind of office setting. And then you've got about half who say they're not interested in a blue collar career. So what do they know and think about trucking becomes the next question. And the first point is, when we ask millennials to tell us whether they have a good or negative view of the sector, and we include a number of comparator sectors: construction trades, the armed forces, manufacturing, retail, resource extraction. I mean, there's two ways to look at this chart. The first is, well, you're at the bottom of the list. Fewer millennials have positive views of the trucking industry than they do of others, right? Particularly construction, which we view as a real competitive sector for young workers in the future of the sector. But the other way to look at this chart is, well, actually, only 15% of millennials have a negative view of your industry. And this was done before the pandemic. I've got new research that shows that since the pandemic started, the impressions of the trucking industry have improved markedly, even among young people, as we've come to realize how critical and essential that sector is to getting us the goods we need in our day-to-day lives. All that being said, the views are not particularly negative, but there's also a lot of people who don't have many views at all. They don't have an image. Maybe the only image they have of the industry is, when they're on the highway or driving and they see the trucks and they hear stories about some of the safety challenges in the industry, but beyond that, they don't know very much. There's some probably strong stereotypes. When we ask young people to rank all of these industries when it comes to pay, when it comes to interesting or fulfilling, challenging work, future job prospects, the lifestyle of someone who works in the industry, how environmentally conscious they are, you can see this green bar here is where trucking falls on those rankings. And except for perhaps pay, where we see these dots of the different sectors fairly similar together, young people are generally more likely to rate trucking as lower on all of these, meaning they think that it's one of the less interesting work opportunities. There's fewer job opportunities in the future. The worker lifestyle isn't as great. There's not a lot of innovation in technology, and worst case out of all is not as environmentally conscious. And so these don't compare relatively well to these other sectors. All challenges when, if you take what I said earlier about how important image is to the choices that I think younger generations are making, it demonstrates a challenge for the industry going forward. We also asked people, which of two statements best describe the sector, right? For example, are there a lot of jobs? And the other side here is not a lot of jobs. Is it a chance to travel? Not a lot of chances to travel. Is it well paid? Not well paid. And you can see that these three, almost all millennials in Canada who are interested in this sector say that, pretty much that these are all things that are true of trucking. But when you look at the ones at the bottom here, good work-life balance, respected by others, for both men and women. I'm speaking to the women Women with Drive conference tomorrow. And this has been a big challenge, right? Questions of how do you recruit women into the sector? These all point to image challenges. And I really focus on the last two in particular, respected by others. What does it say about who I am that I work in this industry? What will others think about me? That's really important for young people who, as I said, live their life online. But so too is this idea of work-life balance. And that's going to be even more important in a post-COVID world where expectations around workplace flexibility, working from home are going to be more normal than they were prior. These are going to be issues, I think, for the sector to confront. Who are the targets for the sector? Well, our research suggests, those who have high school or college degrees. There's actually quite a number of older millennials who might be looking for a career change, who signal that maybe that's an industry that, while they may not have considered it when they're younger, seems more interesting and a better career path for them now. And obviously those who don't mind or want to work with their hands. These are the core targets. Not surprising, I think, for anyone who works in the industry. But more important than that, I think it's coming at work and leadership in this millennial age has to start with this question. And I already kind of alluded to it earlier, and that is, if I work in trucking, what does it say about who I am? We did a focus groups as part of this research, and a colleague of mine was out in Calgary interviewing a bunch of young truck drivers, those who had just started their career. And we were speaking with a young woman in one of these focus groups, and she told us a story about what happened when she told her mom that she was going to be a truck driver. And she said, I came home and I talked to my mom about it. I told her, and my mom started bawling, she started crying. And she said, look, do you really have to do this? Just don't do that work. Just stay with me. I'll help you. I'll do whatever you can. Just don't do that. And that story, I think, rings true for so many people. And it's such an important thing to understand about how influencers in our lives, how that image of what this job means can influence it. And so the work needs to be done not just with individual employers, but the sector as a whole, to tell the story about the trucking industry, about its impact, about how important and essential it is, and about the quality of work and life that you can have doing it, because I think there are a lot of stereotypes that you have to break. But even if you do that, even if the image of the sector improves, there's still things that I think leaders can do to make their workplaces more millennial and Gen Z friendly. And I'm going to point to 5 in particular. The first is, I think what matters most in any relationship, regardless of whether you're dealing with a younger member of your team or an older one, is are your motivations sincere? I've seen in much of the work I've done, leaders who don't really believe that they have to change, don't really believe that they have to engage with particularly younger team members or younger workers in a real way. But I do believe millennials and Gen Z are as good, if not better, than older generations at picking up BS and knowing when a leader is just saying something because they know they have to, but doesn't really mean it. And so are your motivations sincere is really important. Do you want to change? Do you want to engage us? And if the answer is no to that, well, then it's going to be really hard, because any relationship that you want to build, I think needs to build on a sense of trust. And if that trust isn't there, it's going to break down. The second point is, and we've heard a lot about this, particularly over the last year or so, is organizations that have a purpose are going to do better, right? It's not enough just to be in business to make money, but you have to have a business that means something. And if we think about, millennials and Gen Z really seeking work and career options and workplaces that fulfill them, that are meaningful, having a clear purpose is critical to connecting those two dots. And so I find even in my own team, I'm constantly reminding my team about why it is we do what we do as a research company, right? Our mission is to help our clients make better decisions. And so every day we come to work using data and research tools to try to find out how answers that help our clients, who are leaders themselves, make better decisions. That's our purpose, right? That's what keeps my team motivated. It's not just about a paycheck. It's not just about profit or making money. And so having a clear purpose and articulating it and stating it over and over, I think is going to be much more effective. And the same is true on a team, right? You can apply the same philosophy to how you lead a team of 5 than how you lead a team of 50. What are the goals of the team? What's our purpose? And are we constantly feeding that in and hearing back from people is important. At the same time, I think strong millennial and Gen Z friendly organizations are one that welcome everybody to the table. If you remember what I said earlier about us growing up at a time when we were invited to the adults table, we were engaged, we were asked our opinions about things. Well, that doesn't just stop when we leave our parents' home or our school. It goes into the workplace. And so workplaces that engage their teams, that ask them for their input, I think are going to find higher engagement, stronger loyalty, and probably better outcomes, right? That trust builds when I feel I have some input into the process. And, we've heard a lot about inclusivity, about diversity. All of those things are tied to this notion that I want some control over my destiny, over my experience. If I'm going to spend more of my waking days working, then I'm going to hope that I'm going to have some input into the environment and into the team and into the kind of work that I do. And it doesn't need to be, every millennial is the CEO of your company, but having some say, I think, matters a lot. I also think it's important to signal to young workers, both when you're recruiting them, but also in terms of retaining and engaging them, that you're a digital first organization, right? That you seek, as wherever possible, to make the work life more seamless, to integrate technology, right? I've heard time and time again from young people across the country who say, how is it that my day-to-day life is more technologically advanced than my workplace? And for some workplaces, it's hard to move quickly as technology changes. Procurement, I do a lot of work with the federal government. Procurement is slow moving. It's hard to change. But I think the expectation among younger generations, in fact, all generations now, are going to come to expect certain levels of technology that are going to make their lives easier, are going to increase their productivity, and they'll feel, if you're not giving your team the tools they believe they need to succeed, or having at least a conversation of that, it's going to create a wall and a barrier, I think, to long-term success. And then lastly, as I mentioned, do you provide feedback and recognition regularly? Not necessarily something you only should do for millennials and Gen Z, but I think that something that they are more likely to crave and in fact demand. We've seen a wholesale shift in how workplaces, do performance evaluations, right? It used to be maybe you do an annual one if you did one at all. And now we find you need to do them far more often. And it doesn't need to be formal and complicated every time. That's a lot of work, creates a lot of work for managers. But creating moments throughout a week or a month where you can provide feedback, you can give kudos to team members when they've done well, you can provide constructive feedback, I think matters quite a bit. And it ultimately comes down to, I think, a different frame of mind, where today's worker, which is being driven primarily by these two new generations, looks at work, and leaders need to look at work and their team as not folks who work for them, but folks who work with them. And I often get criticized for this, and particularly from older folks I talk to. But I do think that it used to be that an employer looked at their team and said, it's a privilege that you have a job, that I pay you, that you have, I enable you to pay your rent and things like that. But I do think that a new generational framework on work actually says having me as an employee isn't a privilege, right? It's a privilege that I wake up every day and come to this workplace, that if I'm a driver, that I get behind that wheel and I drive that truck from point A to point B. It's a privilege that I come and I give as much as I can to your organization to make you successful. And the very least you can do for me is give me the tools I need to be successful, give me regular feedback so I know how I'm doing, and that you give me a sense that there's an opportunity for me to grow in this job. If you do those three things, I am certain that you're going to find a more engaged, younger workplace. Doesn't mean it's going to be perfect. There's always going to be exceptions to the rule, but I think that thinking really does help. So that leads me to this model, which I call building a reset-friendly organization. These are the 5 pieces of the puzzle. Do you have clear intentions? Do you have a clear purpose? And is it clearly articulated? Are you open? Do you invite people to the table? Are you genuinely open to differing opinions? Will my participation in anything actually make a difference? Is the interaction seamless? And am I getting regular feedback? I think if you do those things, you're more likely to see success. So in my mind, it's we always hear, about millennials and Gen Z and young workplaces and sense of entitlement, and they're not motivated. I think those are stereotypes that unfairly paint this massive generations with a single brush. What I've learned in the research I've done and working with different clients is, at the end of the day, keep in mind, first, that we're far more similar than we're different. 2, that think about how we were raised, think about the role technology plays, and ultimately, I leave you with this idea. If you're in your 50s, let's say, you don't want to ever go back to the workplace of the 1890s, right? You don't want to go to those factories. They weren't safe. They were hard work. You didn't have many benefits. You didn't have much say. I think millennials and Gen Z think about the world and say, I don't want to work in the workplace of the 1990s. And so evolution is constant, and the workplace that we're going to see, I think, is going to be better and stronger because millennials and Gen Z are kind of forcing that change. And I think those that change and embrace it are ultimately going to be the most successful.
All right, so David, one of the questions that we have, and these are really, really good ones, things that I would have thought about as well, from Sabrina and Leanne, first of all, from Phoenix Truck and Crane and Coquitlam. How can we adapt to better fit with millennial general entitlement attitude? We had this question before as well. This one got bumped up. So what do you say on that one?
I guess my first response is we are all, regardless of your generation, entitled in some way to what we think is due to us. But I do believe that millennials and Gen Z have much higher expectations about what's possible and what to expect. And that comes off to others as a sense of entitlement, right? How do you deal with it? Frankly, I don't know if you can manage it or deal with it. I think you have to adapt to it. And it's going to be that they're raising the bar on what those standards are. And they're forcing all of us to kind of, in a way, serve that new, that's not, again, not entitlement, but those new demands. I also do think that, transparency is really important. And being open to what's possible right in your workplace, I think, can help solve those, because I might think I'm entitled to something, or that I should be able to have a certain salary by a certain time. But if I don't really understand how the business works or what the opportunities are, then those expectations aren't going to be very realistic. So I think transparency is a really important tool to helping manage those expectations, but also it's incumbent upon us leaders to set, in a way, a path for our team members so that they know how they get to the next level and what our expectations are, and try to find a middle ground between the two.
Okay, and the next one's a very interesting one as well. Why do you think more millennial women are getting degrees versus men? I don't know if it's a stat that the person knows. Is it because there's more opportunities for women now? Is it because they're more accepted in terms of cultural perception, or is there another reason?
I think it's largely a cultural shift, that the rise of the feminist movement sort of pushed the notion that men do one thing and women do another. I think we've created those opportunities, the pressure to have a family at a young age, right? One of the most fascinating stats is the average age of a woman having her first child in Canada has gone from 25 years old when I was born in 1981, and that was the age my mom had me, to closer to 30 today, right? And so we're having fewer children. It's been happening for a long time. We're moving away from rural areas, the need to have large families, and the cultural expectation that women and men have particular roles to play is completely breaking down. And in fact, there's now lots of debate about sort of the decline of masculinity and what role, men are playing, and sort of tying that to sort of certain political movements. But I do think that it's in part cultural. It's also in part opportunities and the expectation now that women should get paid the same as men and should have the same opportunities. So I think it's going to only continue to move in that direction.
Awesome. All right. So there's another one that we have as well. Anonymous attendee says, I love the description of parents and millennials being called snowplows. For the next gen or Gen Z, I often hear parents called helicopter parents. How can parents be better, more aware, or know when to plow or copter their kids so we prepare them for the future? Like, how do we be transparent, yet at the same time protect them?
Yeah, it's a hard one. Again, I wish I had more expertise on the psychology of it all. I think, again, I don't have a prescription for what makes a good parent or a bad parent. In fact, despite there's some who say that millennials are like the outcome is a bad thing, right? That parents have, I don't necessarily think that's true. I think, I think there was an overprotection, and so, people have described millennials as not being very resilient and not being able to deal with failure all that well. There's probably some truth to that. On the other hand, we see a generation that has an immense ability to work together, is very cooperative, and can solve problems really easily. So, the helicoptering part, I think, is, I'm not a parent, so I've never really lived through this or thought about it, but I think you just need to ask yourself, like, is this ultimately going to benefit my kids? And I think we've all experienced in some way those helicopter parents. I once received an email from a parent who said their son was traveling in Europe, but he'd really be good for the job that I was trying to fill. And so here's his resume. And, I politely responded to the parent saying, thanks for this, but honestly, your son would be much better off applying himself than having you do it. And so it's just those little things to think sometimes about whether or not it really is going to help them. But the instinct to protect, I think, has always been there. The ability for boomers and today millennial parents to do it has just been so much easier and greater because technology and resources to do it.
No, and I think I liked your answer that you're not a parent, so you don't really know. And myself being a parent, I can tell you that there's been so many times where I want to jump in and become that helicopter protective parent. But at the same time, you have to gauge each situation differently and say, hey, this one is a learning opportunity. Let them make all the mistakes. This one's a safety issue. So you got to really, you got to play the parent card and do what's best. And I think at the end of the day, all parents, all caregivers have the best interests of their kids in heart. We have some more questions, but we're also on time crunch. So I'm going to ask you one more. This is a fun question. And I think you'll like this one as well. So how can we make trucking more sexy or sexier and it appealing to millennials knowing that they can make up such a huge portion of the workplace? So any ideas how we can make trucking sexier?
Well, I think there's so much. I mean, there's no perfect job, and the challenge is you're competing against jobs that appear so sexy, right? When you ask young people, what company do you want to work for? Google and all the tech companies, reign number one, and it's hard to compete with that. But I think I don't know if you necessarily can make trucking sexy. I should say that first. So maybe we lower our expectations a little bit, but there are things you can do to talk about, how good a career you can have, the ability to see large parts of the country or North America, to have flexibility and stability in your workplace, right? I think some of these values are going to shift, but at the end of the day, I don't think people appreciate how important and essential the sector actually is.
Absolutely.
And it's talking about, you don't get those bananas or those tomatoes on your table unless a truck driver and that company help deliver them. And I think that's where you win. So you don't necessarily win on sexiness, but you win on purpose. And I think you can be much more, I think that the industry can be much more effective telling that story. You don't hear it enough. And you hear it from a lot of other industries, but I think each one of them now are sort of in an arms race to sort of one up each other.
Absolutely.
But I don't think you can make the industry sexy, but you can make it relevant. And that's the important thing.
100%. And you know what? I think you nailed it. And I wrote a piece a little while ago on the importance of truck drivers in the industry or the trucking industry. And I think people take a lot of the stuff for granted. And so I think they just need to be cognizant that, this sector really, really keeps the economy going. And without them, we wouldn't really be doing a lot. So, you know what, David, I thank you for all the information that you provided. It's been spectacular. I know I learned a lot about it, and congratulations on being one of the top firms in the research and in the research field. So congratulations. And yeah, you still look 18. I'd say tops 19 maybe, but congratulations.
I appreciate it, and have a great day. Thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you so much for being part of Speaker Series 2020.
A big thank you to our speakers and presenters today. Mike Harnett, thank you, from Solaris Fatigue Management. After that, Norm Ralph from Apex Abilities, followed by David Coletto from Abacus Data, and also Tracy Steen from Move Daily Fitness. Also our sponsors, once again, we have Solaris Fatigue Management, we've got Safety Vantage, we've got Move Daily by Tracy Steen Fitness, and JGK Media. Before we wrap up, I need to say a big thank you, a big massive thank you to the team at Safety Driven for putting this event on for all of us. Speaker Series is just an amazing event, and they've got tons of events that happen throughout the year and also resources that they offer as well. If you haven't seen their website, it's super easy to navigate. Go to www.safetydriven.ca. That's it. One click. You've got all the tabs at the very top. You can click on resources. You can click on downloads. Everything can be downloaded free of charge, so there's no fees whatsoever. So please go on the website. I use it all the time. It's fantastic. After that, I'd like to say a big thank you, a big, massive thank you for, again, to our sponsors. And from that, we're going to be moving on and tell you that we want to thank you for being one of the first to be part of our very first virtual event. I know we've had a lot to learn from today. There's a lot of information that you took in, and hopefully you took in that information that you can take back to your organization and learn to deal with the topics that we talked about. We thank you again to our speakers and our attendees for joining us, and thank you to Safety Driven, and thank you to the team behind Safety Driven who got all this done, but also a big thank you to all of you. 2 grand prizes will be drawn, and you will be contacted by Safety Driven team on those ones, so check your email. You could be having a $250 gift card from Amazon, or you could also be having a chance to be on television with me on Hello Trucking. So once again, enjoy your day. Visit safetydriven.ca for more information, and we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for being a part of Speaker Series 2020. This is Jag. Thank you.